first come into the music industry, you got to take the oath. There is no ifs, ands about it. You're going to take the oath. Just because you get a recording contract don't mean that you're part of the elite. You just on the recording contract, and yes, you have to take the oath whenever you get a contract, but you're not necessarily a part of the elite because you're not making any money. The people who are part of the elite and do blood sacrifices to get to where they are, they've been hand-chosen. And they went to them and said, look, we believe that you can be an asset to our family. Are you willing to be a part of the family? We can put you at the 20 million marker. We can put you at the 30 million marker. And you'd be like, well, what do I have to do?
Of course you're uncertain, Cal. Naturally, so was I, till I met him. But now imagine, if you can, a life without uncertainty, freedom from doubt, the ability to choose, single-mindedness.
One life from each of us, Cal, is all he asks. And he rewards our devotion 1,000-fold.
Personal desires, oh yes, of course, anything. That's part of it.
It's only the beginning.
There was a time, Cal, when man was at one with the gods before the fall. Now we're at one again.
Cal, we want you to join us.
Listen, they're all a part of the boss. You have to take the oath. The oath is the boss, even if you get a recording deal. But you are not into destroying the Lord's word unless you get hand-chosen to be a part of that $20, $30 million work. Now, they just don't tell you, hey, you're going to get that $30 million. They offer it to you because you have to be perfectly aware that we're asking you to do this. See, they just can't trick you. You get me? They just can't trick you and say, well, he don't know he's serving the devil because the Lord won't honor it. You have to be perfectly aware that you are going against the Lord's people. You're going against what the Lord stands for. And when you shake on it, you sign that damn contract in blood. And I'm telling you how they get down. You sign the contract in blood once you agree to these men that you're willing to destroy God's word.
They give you a taste of the good life. You know, they take you on private vacations to isolated islands, or you get the penthouse suites in hotels. You get yachts, private jets, shopping trips. They lavish you with gifts. They make it look like it's the good life. This is the good life. Join us. You can have anything you want. You are a god. You can have the world. This is what they tell them. They don't tell them the small writing. And so people get infatuated by the luxury and the lavishness of being, running elbows with the rich and the elite. Your own private jets and yachts and islands. The good life. They're treated very well. And then they join. They decide, okay, I'm going to join. I'm going to join with you guys. And you start moving through the levels and you realize, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what I signed up for. Because then you start learning the ghastly truth of Satanism. And then when you get in, it's rituals, eating babies' hearts, sacrificing babies, drinking blood, being forced to have, if you're married, adulterous relationships because all of them are forced into adultery. Satan doesn't honor a marriage. You're married to him. Satanists have their own services that mock Christian services. They have them almost every weekend. They have them in underground churches across America. And they do everything opposite and against what a real church would do. Why would you want to join a group of people that think eating feces and drinking urine is fun? It's not optional. You have to do it. They all do it. And they don't complain. They get beyond that stage. They don't complain. They do it. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, what do? You go to an underground Hollywood club, a super secret Satanist club. Do they serve feces on toothpicks? These people are nasty. And you can tell it's the sheer demonism, demonic beings that control them, that make them do it. I mean, what human could eat feces and not just puke? Eating feces is huge with some. Huge. Anything abominable is high ranking with Satan. Anything that we would think is totally inhuman, abominable, then that's what you must do in Satan's realm. These groups are huge. There could be 100, 200 people at a gathering. They meet on estates, in people's mansions, often on a Friday or Saturday night, so it looks like the person's having a party, maybe. They meet in churches on Saturdays, underneath Catholic churches, for rituals. They have these rituals where they bring in animals. And this weekend, pretty much all the groups had donkeys. And they force all the members to have sexual relations, bestiality with the donkey. Okay, you've been on my nerves for 2 months, you get the cat. And you've been on my nerves for a month, you get the dog. And you, the highest ranking of us all, you get the donkey. She chooses who gets what. And she forces them to be sodomized. They all do this, not just her. They force them to be sodomized by donkeys. They force them to perform fellatio on donkeys. And nobody gets away with it just because you're the president of the United States who goes to the Chicago ones where Penny Pritzker is in charge. Just because you're the president doesn't mean you get out. It means you have to give more. Because you've got the highest rank in the land. More abominable things are expected of you. It goes on. One of the biggest things you give up is any kind of humanity. It's nothing but about humiliation and degradation. You want more, you have to give more. You have to give up everything about what makes you human. And they all don't sit around in their black robes. That's so Hollywood. Because in all these rituals, a big part of them is the orgies that take place. They all take their clothes off. They're all doing drugs.
You gotta do something huge, but what do you do for a final blowout?
How drunk do you get at these parties?
Pretty drunk. It's kind of a social obligation. I have a concept for the final fiesta. Labor Day weekend. We need to think outside of the box.
All right.
We're gonna have an orgy.
Ew!
This is our chance to do it right. Take back what's been taken from us.
Isn't that from Goonies?
I am paraphrasing Goonies there, yes.
This Labor Day.
I don't know how you could have sex in front of a room full of people. I don't even like to get naked at the spa.
Find out if this group of friends
Is it true? All of you were having this orgy and you didn't think to invite us?
What are you all looking at me for?
has what it takes
I'm in. And I'm fully shaved.
to pull off a good old-fashioned orgy.
It's part of their requirements. When you serve Satan, you know, your duties never end. It's always more and more and more and more. And on top of eating poop and drinking urine and practicing bestiality with donkeys, you have to sacrifice. You have to cause death and suffering. And when you cause death and suffering, it's accredited to you, and that's more power that you get. You know, these people are willing to have sex with donkeys to help ask people to support their fashion lines, because you don't get a big name brand in America unless you're one of them. So Kanye West is coming out with a new fashion line, and he wants everybody's support. So yeah, he'll do his rituals in Chicago and ask for everybody's support.
What happened They start thinking about things, and the conscience wear on them, and they're getting these phone calls saying you didn't throw up the goat today, and notice you didn't do those subliminal messages like we told you to in your record. So what's up with you? I'm just having a nervous breakdown. Get your ass together and get your act together. See, Fantasia tried that, and they got her back on track. I'm telling you, they had them second thoughts. It's too late. You get me? Fantasia got in too deep. Now, when she had first won American Idol, she should have just took the contract and left it alone. But see, they want more. And how they get you, they dangle stuff in front of you. Well, the way you going, you get a shoe line, you get a jog line, you get these clothing, your shirt. How would you like all that? Just keep doing what you're doing. They're putting it in your head, so later on they're going to pick your ass and say, you gave any thought to want to go higher? I would love to be in a $20 million club. Okay. Then they have one of them women come. See, a man ain't going to talk. Have a woman that's of the sisterhood be like, well, this is what we need you to do. I ain't sucking him off. Well, don't tell me what you ain't going to do, ho. You're going to suck him off, and you're going to let all these other guys go up in you. And if you don't do it, you will not have the money you have now. We're going to freeze your account. And if you tell the secrets, we'll kill your family. And she'd be like, what you talking about? They got pictures of your family, man. Once you become a part of these people, they have private investigators to go around taking pictures of your family. Did you know that?
When you join into Satan's kingdom and you join the high levels of the Brotherhood, it's expected of you to be as vile as possible. If you can't be vile, you're not going to get anything. You stop going to the meetings and you stop going to rituals, you start slowly losing everything that you had built up. You have to give to get in Satan's kingdom. They met to do rituals. These freaks are always meeting to do rituals together. Because if you want the movie roles coming in, then you've got to keep doing the rituals. If you want more fame as a singer, you want more time on the award shows, then you've got to be doing your time in the rituals. If you don't do your time in the rituals, then you suffer. Satan makes you pay. If you want to be a celebrity in Hollywood, then your attendance at these parties is going to be mandatory. Eating feces, drinking urine, having illicit sex with these old men. You give up everything.
See, that's dealing with the realization that they sold. They can't, see, every day they have to be high. They have to, be on a planet of nowhere, because when you really think about what you've done for a few dollars, and they sad as hell. Everybody asks that question in the hood. Well, damn, man, they got them houses, they got all them freaks. How could they be sad? Because the Lord make you shame-faced after so long. The Lord put the shame on you and show you to your face. You sold out for a season.
If your ultimate goal is to be famous, then you're gonna do a lot to get there, like sign your name in blood in a contract with the devil.
The things on this show that other people won't touch with a 100-foot pole, and tonight's going to be no different.
And this is the thing I've been trying to tell people. You don't understand what demigods is? Did you look it up when I told you to? Like, I talked about this last week. Do you know what a demigod is? A demigod is a person that's half supernatural and half human. Who you think made the pyramid? Who you really think made those pyramids, man? Did you not know that the pyramid is also on the side of the moon? Did you know that? Did you know the pyramid that you see in Egypt is on the side of the moon? I wonder why. Spirit took them over. You ain't gonna come here and think you're gonna set up camp, and the fallen angels, this is their home. They got nowhere else to go. They can't go out in the galaxy. The Lord forbid them to go. They can go from the moon to earth. That's it. And they decided, okay, we're going to take the Lord's people and destroy them. And that's what they're done. And that's the offspring of angels. When the angels' fathers came down here and mixed seed with the human side, they left their offsprings on earth. When the Lord put their fathers in captivity, they still was roaming the earth. I'm going to tell y'all something. A lot of people in power are not who you think they are. You're going to be surprised to see who Obama really is. and Rothschild and the Rockefeller. I'm telling you now. But I have to put the vibration out to let y'all know. These people that you see before you are not who you think they are, man. They're straight up demigods. This is a spiritual warfare. That's why America is going through turbulence. America is going to be crushed, you know, and the people that's running America are evildoers. They're working for Satan, man. Obama looks just like humanity, right? All these Bush and Clintons, but those are demonic gods, man. I mean, Lord knows I wish I could just show it to you the way I see it, but I can't. I can only relate this to you, and those who's going to gravitate to it will. The demigods, which are the fallen angels' offsprings, and when they come up on this earth, they live inside of whoever called them up. That's why Beyonce got a thing called Sasha Fierce. They call that demon up. They absolutely done made a deal with these fallen angels, man, and these angels are using them.
You're going to run into soul scalping and possessions, demonic possessions, which are two different things, basically. Because a scalping can typically take place outright, but it usually involves some kind of demonic possession first. Demons take hold of a person, and then the ultimate scalping takes place. Their bodies can become havens, literally, for demonic entities.
Almost every human has been successfully occupied.
Barely a bone not broken or organ ruptured.
This one wants to live.
When we occupy this host, her memories will lead us to the resistance.
Her name is Melanie Strider. She was born in Louisiana. Her family escaped the initial waves of colonization.
What is happening? Is she resisting? It's important you stay in control of this host. This is war.
And so now it makes more sense than ever, because when you look at the bloodlines of all these secret societies and these groups, everything's always bloodline oriented. And the reason they get bloodline oriented is because it's a serpent seed bloodline they're protecting. Because with serpent seed bloodline, you can do particular things. It's a different seed than Yah's seed through Adam. It's a different seed. And so you're gonna see, when you open up your eyes and become awake to what this New World Order is, what the Illuminati is, so you can grasp the idea that the Illuminati is dominated by 13 bloodline families. Bloodlines. They protect that bloodline. They intermarry with the bloodlines to protect that bloodline. When you look at the mafia, what do you see? A very bloodline-protected organization. Why? Because they're serpent seed. They protect that Italian serpent seed bloodline. And not all Italians are serpent seed, but the mafia protects a certain bloodline. And it's only people that have that particular bloodline in the mafia that can become bosses. And all very tied into the Vatican, as are all the Illuminati families tied into the Vatican. That protects all. They probably keep it all in their little vault in the Vatican. They keep everything, all the genealogies, and you know how these serpents are. But anyway, the CIA is no different. That's why you'll see many intelligence agencies. It's a generational thing. It's a family thing.
Where my only ally is another double agent, a man I hardly know, my father.
They shake hands with Lucifer. They know who he is, and Lucifer appears in many different personifications on Earth. He appears as a man. He appears as a woman. He can appear as any type of being he wants to. You watch these movies, Hollywood, and sometimes they come up with these movies and like supernatural show or whatever, and they'll show Satan has an office. And I always just laughed at those until I realized that was real. And I was also told it was real. And I was like, no way, he really does. He owns an office. He's a typical businessman, not all the time, it's just one of his little hobbies. But he has an office building in New York. He has an office in this building, and it's called Goldman Sachs. I know you're all shocked, but he does hold an office in Goldman Sachs.
Because, you know, the Lord has also granted Satan some power too. How do you think that they're so intelligent in doing what they do? Do you really think that they're that smart to be able to build an oil rig like that? They're that smart to be able to build NASA machinery to go out of space? Satan has powers. Satan has to counsel with the Lord to see what he can and cannot do. I mean, if you go to Isaiah 45:7, the Lord tell you, I control the peace, I control the evil. I mean, the Lord controls everything in this galaxy. He lets Satan get away with a lot of things because he's bound by his word. When these people pray to Satan, they have power. Don't think the children of Satan don't have power. They do, for now. They have power, man. When they pray to Satan, he makes things happen for them, don't they? They become rich. They become powerful. They get the latest technology. And so you don't think that Satan has demons that's lurking the earth trying to pretend to be the Lord because they think they are what God. That's why the Lord even gave them a blessing. He gave them weapons of mass destruction. And what did they do? What did Satan give it? What did Satan give his elites? He gave them the harp. Because when he gave them the harp, now they feel like they're just as powerful as the Lord. They control the weather. They control Tsunami. They can control Katrina. And they still doing it.
Well, they need to depend on technology for this because, after all, Satan as a god is pretty useless. He has to depend on technology for everything. Otherwise, he can't rule the world. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipresent. He's not all-powerful. He's just allowed to do with what he has, with what the Lord allows him to do with the things he has.
Argus is the equivalent of having up to 100 predators look at an area the size of a medium-sized city at once. This image was taken 17,500 feet above Quantico, Virginia, and covers 15 square miles.
This whole image is at a very, very fine resolution. So if we wanted to know what is going on in any spot along this image, say near this building at this intersection, we can generate a moving image that shows what's going on in the area.
Simply by touching the screen, Antoniades has opened up a window showing a detailed area, while still maintaining the broader context.
And everything that is a moving object is being automatically tracked. The color boxes represent that the computer has recognized the moving objects. You can see individuals crossing the street. You can see individuals walking in parking lots. There's actually enough resolution to be able to see the people waving their arms or walking around, what kind of clothes they wear. And you could pick the location of where you produce these images anywhere in the entire field of view.
Now, how this happened, man trusting these fallen angels. They made a deal with these angels, come in human format. All right, they got spacecraft, all this stuff. All this technology that we got came from them.
They're already fallen beings. They're Satan's pawns. They're Satan's aces. They're his generals. They're people, beings that were with him and helped him instigate the last rebellion when he was kicked out of heaven. When Satan was full of pride and wanted to be worshipped as God, they were with him then.
All of these people have a hidden agenda, and they all pray to Satan. And Satan rewards them and controls them with his offsprings, and they call the fallen angels. So they morph themselves, man. They can morph themselves into a woman, a man, a car, a house, whatever they want to do.
I've seen symbols.
We've kept much from you, Sam.
This isn't my war.
I fear it soon will be.
What you're about to see is top secret. Do not tell my mother.
Any of these look like the symbols you saw?
Where did you get these? Archaeologists found these unexplained markings in ancient ruins all over the world.
space race of the 1960s was in response to an event. If you breathe a word of what you've seen here, we'll do time for treason.
Everything humans know of our planet we were told had been shared. You lied to us. You've made a grave mistake.
Years from now, they're gonna ask, where were you when they took over the planet?
This is why they have this thing called aliens. There's no such thing as aliens, but the fallen angels' offspring is causing this hysteria with aliens. So you be scared to death and you accept the mark of the beast before they get here.
Just wanted to say so long, Percy. Oh, and just one thing.
They're going to start this thing of Armageddon themselves because they know their time is running out and their father, who is Satan, don't have much time. So the so-called demigods, who are the fallen angels' offsprings, are already set up to take the place over and to do what they do.
And he will confirm the covenant with the many for 7 years. This marks the beginning of our 7 years of peace.
The end-time prophecy has begun.
The whole world will feel sympathy and love for me. They will follow me wherever I lead them.
Left behind.
And then they're going to just start forcing you because the fallen angel offspring is ruthless. So when it gets ready to do the mark of the beast, it won't be man controlling it. They're going to show who they are. They're not going to sugarcoat nothing anymore. When the thing finally comes down to the mark of the beast, these angels going to show who they are, and they everywhere. Everybody you thought was a friend, they're going to come out of that flesh, and they're going to show who they really are. They're going to be the fallen angels' offspring, and it's going to be horrifying.
It was all part of my plan. And no one, human or visitor, can comprehend the magnitude of what is coming.
This is not a coincidence, man. So who will give the mark of the beast? The damn fallen angels' offsprings are going to get the mark of the beast.
Satanic cults and their various offshoots exist throughout the world. We know what the satanic cult professes to believe. We know what their potential for violence might be if they choose to be true to their belief.
He does sex to us. He kills babies there. Right. We eat babies.
It is imperative that these cases be solved. They are vicious, revolting, and create fear in any community. Men are apprehensive for the safety of their wives, mothers, and daughters, women for their children and themselves. Perhaps one of the most despicable crimes in general, and in particular among Satanists, is that involving a child. In every state in the nation, there are reports and investigations of satanic crime and satanic ritual abuse. More than 2 million American children each year are reported missing, many of them too young to be runaways. In addition, more than 5,000 unidentifiable bodies of children are found annually in the United States.
Physical abuse was a part of keeping me silent. My fingers were burned on a stove. I was forced to watch pets killed and put in an oven, and I was told that if I talked, the same thing would happen to me. They would dismember bodies and then hang me upside down over a vat. I think it was acid, I'm not sure, but there were body parts, and they told me they would lower me into the acid if I ever talked about this. And one memory I had, in order to get the blood, they used me as the person to get the blood from. It was basically the lamb, the child of God. And they would put pins and needles in between my fingers, and I would be bled so that they could have communion. Another way to keep me silent was to use a gun. Pornography, child prostitution brings in big money, and I was not to talk about that either, and I was threatened to be killed if I talked, as well as burned. They used cigarettes and other forms of burning to keep me silent. And I had a pet bird that they killed in front of me. And then I was put in a cage. And so as a young child, I made the association that if I were in a cage, then I must be like the bird, and if they can kill the bird, they can easily kill me too. Remembering comes out in poetry as well, and my pet bird was killed in front of me, and I was also forced to participate in the murder of babies. And so I wrote a poem about not being able to talk about that. Birds and babies, go away. Mustn't tell, mustn't say. Mommy will get mad at me. Must pretend I do not see. Nothing happened, don't remember. Helter skelter, now dismember. Witches chant and babies burn. Mustn't talk, it will be my turn.
I was raised in Belgium and sold into a murderous pedophile network right around my 6th birthday. I was used in this network for 5 years and a half. Adult men that were part of this exclusive club were there for various reasons, but there was a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs. And the children were the commodity, the highest, the most valued commodity, and were used for sex mostly. But there were a number of aristocrats that were part of this club who also liked killing children.
Friends of the family and strangers and my family used to rape me. Make me abort the babies I had.
It would be hard to imagine more misery and suffering than what Teresa says she's had to endure.
And us kids would be made to do things with the adults and the animals, and then a sacrifice would happen.
The sacrifice, were these animal sacrifices?
Animals and people.
On what scale do you think this was happening?
Enormous, far beyond what we've ever heard of here before.
Teresa's mother, Bridget.
You're talking about mass murder?
Yes, on a scale that this country's never heard of before. Like the old people's homes now, only these are...
For the first time, Teresa is learning what it's like to live with love instead of fear. In this quiet English village, with the help of her mother, she's slowly repairing her broken life. Teresa is now 15, but at the age of 2, she was left in the care of this woman, the grandma she called Nan. And that, she says, is when her torment started.
Who was the leader? Who was the boss of the gang, of the cult?
At home, it was my Nan.
Your Nan made you have sex with animals?
Yeah. Like goats and donkeys.
The story of Teresa is a story almost too horrible to recount. A case of child abuse that goes well beyond the kind of things we normally associate with the abuse of children. In 27 years of reporting, it has to be one of the most painful stories I have ever had to tell.
How many men or how many people would have sex with you?
What, at one time?
Yes.
About everyone who was there, which must have been about 20. You know, from 10 to 20 people. If it was a big ceremony, it used to be 30.
What would your grandma be doing when these men were forcing themselves on you?
Usually laughing. Or smiling. Or having sex with another man. Or other men.
A chronicle of debauchery and depravity so horrific it's hard to believe. You have to ask yourself, could Teresa be just making it up?
No. I know what's true and what's not. No, I know what I saw.
Children don't make up elaborate lies that this would have to be if it was a lie, which I know it is not. It isn't.
This couldn't be a terrible dream, a nightmare that you're reliving?
No. It's no dream. It's a nightmare, but it's not one you can wake up from. It's there all the time.
This really happened, you're quite sure of that?
Yeah.
The police don't think Teresa made up a story. Some of the cult members are to stand trial. 5 men have been charged with rape. As for Nan, the grandmother, she's 61 and lives in this council flat in South London. She's charged on 7 counts of aiding and abetting rape and 2 counts of performing abortions on Teresa. If you're finding this hard to believe, so did I at first. But then there are the medical reports, evidence of sustained sexual abuse. And there's this, a statement prepared for 60 Minutes by Teresa's psychiatrist. It says, in my opinion, Teresa's account is not the product of a psychotic illness, nor the figment of a fertile imagination. I believe her to be telling the truth.
I know what's true and what's not.
We also took Teresa's story to this man, therapist Ray Wire. He reads a transcript of our interview and listens to her voice.
It's no dream.
Few people, if any, in Britain have counselled as many victims of satanic abuse or Satanists themselves as Ray Wire has. If there is an expert on satanic cults, it would have to be him.
Do you believe Teresa's story?
I believe Teresa's story. It's exactly the same story as I've heard from men who says they've done it.
You've dealt with other cases like hers?
Yes.
21 cases like hers, he says, in the past 2 years alone.
Themes like they were put in boxes with spiders and worms, where they were trapped in fear, where there was a high use of excrement and urine, where there was talk of human sacrifice.
Take just one of those rituals, putting children in boxes with spiders and worms. Now, listen to what Teresa told her mother.
And they had a coffin-like box that children were put in with spiders and snakes and the lid shut and left in there. I would have come out deranged. I could not have coped with that mentally at all.
You have evidence to back up stories like Teresa's, that this is really happening?
Well, we have that age of child, 6, 5 and 4, giving information that ties up with Teresa. How do those children know? How do those children able to describe rituals, to talk about ceremonies, to talk about sacrificing animals? How do those children know?
Nightmares, imagining it?
You can't imagine those things at 3 and 4 years old, and you also don't have the evidence of anal sex abuse and oral sex abuse and all that other abuse that clearly those children have experienced and endured.
During these ceremonies, was Satan, the devil, ever referred to?
He was called Lucifer.
What did they say about the devil, about Lucifer?
That killing the people made him happy.
Sacrifices to please the devil. According to Teresa, the worst rituals took place at a house somewhere in the country.
It was big, you know, expensive. From the front it looked like a castle. You know, it had a long drive and big double wooden doors.
Do you think they were rich people then?
Very rich.
Now, where was this big house somewhere in the country? Teresa says she can't take the police there because the Satanists made sure she'd never know how to find it.
Teresa was always drugged, or on a couple of occasions she says she was knocked out, so that she never fully knew the route.
There was a tramp who was brought in once, you know, and he was killed. He was cut from his throat down to his stomach, and they ate him, or bits of him.
They killed a man at a ceremony?
Yeah.
In front of you?
Yeah, in front of all of us.
Did the tramp, did this man fight back?
No, I think he was, you know, drunk or something. He seemed really dopey. He was laughing a lot when he was brought in. And he started screaming when they began to cut. But after a while, you know, he died. I'd seen a few killings before then. Although I wasn't used to it, you know, that was the worst one. I really don't know what I thought. I suppose I thought, thank God it's not me.
Let me get this right now. Are you saying that you saw more than one person killed in that house?
Yeah. I've seen loads of babies killed there, just newborn babies, or aborted ones which were only small. You know, 4-year-olds. Any age, really.
Did they ever say they might kill you?
They threatened to kill my little girl, who, when I left, was still at the house.
A friend?
Huh?
What little girl?
My little girl, Alex. She's about 4 now.
You mean you had a child?
Yeah.
How old were you when you had that child?
11.
Motherhood at the age of 11. But from what Teresa told her mother, it wasn't the only pregnancy.
We think about 7 or 8 times. It's hard to say. It was constantly happening from the time she was capable of being pregnant.
What happened to the pregnancies, to the babies?
They were aborted by my nan or by one of the doctors at the house.
There were doctors there at that house?
Yeah, there was 2, I think. Yeah, and a nurse.
What would happen to the fetuses, the unborn babies?
I used to be taken away most of the time, and one time the baby was taken out of me and then killed in front of me because it was still alive.
And then, what would happen?
Well, after they killed it, they would eat it. But we were also made to eat it.
You were made to eat your own fetus?
Yeah.
Who made you do this?
My nan.
You'd think the one person in the world you could leave a little girl with would be Grandma. Someone to give her love and protect her from harm. Yet, when Teresa was left to live with her grandmother, they might as well have handed her to the devil himself.
Grandmothers, I mean, the vision it conjures up for you, sweet old lady with grey hair, rosy cheeks, holding her arms out to love her grandchildren. And it was exactly the reverse.
But why was Teresa living with Nan in the first place and not with her mother?
Well, when my first marriage broke up, I took the children with me and couldn't cope. So I gave them to their father, who in turn moved to his mother's. And
to Nan's place?
Yeah. And when he left the Nan's place, he left the children there.
How do you feel now towards her grandma and the other people who did all those things to your daughter?
They disgust me. They are the worst form of life this earth has had the misfortune to create. Vile.
Did you ever try to run away? You must have been frightened.
A couple of times I did, but my uncle, he caught me and brought me back.
Going to the police? Did that occur to you?
No. No. I thought it was normal, even though I didn't like it. I mean, you don't like to eat greens, but somehow, I thought it was just her being called to be kind or something like that.
She said to me it was something that everybody did, she thought, like you don't like going to school or the dentist, you don't like going to the black masses.
It was never any different. I didn't have nothing to compare it to.
All part of life, Teresa thought. Even a miscarriage one day at school.
Yeah, I asked the teacher if I could go to the toilet, and she allowed me out. I went into the toilet and the baby was in my knickers. I thought it was dead, but it wasn't. It was still moving.
And yet no one at school knew?
No.
Saw anything?
No. Or if they did, they didn't say. No, she was treated for a high temperature, fever, nothing more.
What did she do with the baby?
She kept her for a while because she was frightened that they'd use the child as part of the rituals. So she turned the pencil case into a little coffin. Apparently she put roses in to make her smell sweet, put a letter with her, pictures of herself and her brother, a picture of me.
And then I put it down the chute because I didn't want my nan to get it.
As we said earlier, the police have already charged some members of the cult, and we know they're also investigating Teresa's accounts of those ritual killings. If there were as many as she told us, then the Satanists had a problem. How did they get rid of the bodies?
They had a tub, pretty big, I don't know. A very big tub, and they used to put the bodies and bones in there. And it used to go like, fizzy and that. And then there was nothing left. Well, there didn't seem to be, but when they cleared it out, there used to be a sludge at the bottom.
Teresa's story, her account, doesn't really surprise you.
It doesn't surprise me in the light of satanic abuse, no.
Do you get frustrated with people who just won't accept that these things do happen?
Yes, because I've worked with murderers in prisons for years. Not that long ago, a boy was found in a forest in southern England without a head. We have no doubts that men can do that. And yet when we start talking about men within Satanism who actually believe in evil and it's the right to express evil, we suddenly have a doubt.
As I was leaving Teresa's place, she handed me this note. It's addressed to the film crew. She says, "Thanks for bothering to help kids like me. I hope it helps." On the other side, there's a poem Teresa made up while she was staying at Nan's place. She calls it Nothing Left.
Nothing left. I would scream, but there is no voice left. I would cry, but there are no tears left. I'd fight, but there is no strength left.
Satanists celebrate a host of rituals and ceremonies during the course of each year. As some are held more important than others, a host of crimes are committed before, during, and after the ceremonies. On January 7th, the celebration of St. Weinbald is held. It is a blood ritual and animal or human sacrifice, including surgical dismemberment, and they're completed with males between the ages of 15 and 33 years of age. Satanic revels are held on January 17th. A sexual type of ritual, anal, oral, and vaginal activities are found with female victims ranging from 7 to 17 years of age. Candlemas, a high religious holiday, is held on February 2nd. At these sexual ceremonies, animal, oral, and vaginal rituals are completed with females from age 1 to 17. February 25th signals Beltane, a blood ceremony. Communions are held with blood filling the chalice. Animal dismemberment and sacrifices are common to this ceremony. The celebration of St. Iketat is held on March 1st. During the blood ceremony, human blood from devotees of any age and any sex is consumed for strength and as homage to demons. The spring equinox, March 20th, a celebration of orgies including anal, oral, vaginal, or bestiality sex between devotees of any age and any sex. Sacrifices are common. April 21st to the 26th is the time of preparation for the Grand Climax. Kidnappings of women, children, and animals are common. Thus, the victims are held until April 26th to May 1st, a Damur ceremony for Corpus de Ball. Age group includes infants and females up to 25 years of age. April 30th, called May Eve or Walpurgis Night, signals a host of activities and historically is devoted to coven initiations. June 2nd brings about anti-Christian ceremonies using blessed wafers and blood mixtures for many blasphemous purposes. June 21st and 22nd signal the summer solstice, when orgies, anal, oral, and vaginal in nature, take place. Any age, any sex. Demon revels are held on July 1st. Sex with demons, human and animals, primarily large dogs, take place with devotees of any age or any sex. July 20th to the 27th signals the time for additional kidnappings and holdings of victims for the July 26th Grand Climax and August Eve festivities, which include sacrifices. Satanic revels occur on August 3rd, with its sexual orgies with females from 7 to 17 years of age. The coveted marriage to Satan takes place on September 7th, at which time human sacrifices of groomed devotees occur. The age group is female, 1 to 17 years of age. September 20th is the time of the Midnight Host, a blood ceremony when dismemberment of females 1 to 21 years of age takes place. Hands are planted as part of the ceremony. September 22nd, or Michaelmas, entails anal, oral, and vaginal orgies that also include bestiality with any age or sex devotees. October 29th to the 31st, Samhain, or Halloween celebration, is a high unholy day. Sex with demons is primary, as is infant sacrifice. On November 1st to the 4th, satanic revels again occur. Anal, oral, and vaginal sexual activities take place with females from 7 to 17 years of age. And December 22nd, or the winter solstice, entails orgies with any age and any sex. And on December 24th, Demon Revels is a demure ceremony and a signaling of the high grand climax. Any age and any sex is included in these ceremonies. Eric Pryor is a former satanic high priest turned Christian who now spends his time educating people about the dark side of satanic cults.
When I was a practicing occultist, oftentimes I would come into this park and practice on various different holidays, lunar holidays and occultic holidays, and we'd actually have rituals in the park when we didn't have a space to do rituals indoor. So what I'd like to do is take you into the park and just kind of show you one of the places that you would start asking your questions and start looking to see, what the occultists are up to. There's two different communities that use this park. One is the pagan or occultic community, and the other community is, of course, the homosexual community. Interestingly enough, they go hand in hand. And so, well, see, here you go. Upon entering the park, you can see they've already got started. Okay. This is a pentacle. Interesting thing about this pentacle is it's an upright pentacle. This is not a satanic pentacle. Now, the reason why this pentacle would not be considered satanic is because it has one point up. Now, Satanists would reverse this star, or pentacle as it's called, and have 2 points up. Those represent the horns of Baphomet and or the horns of Satan. But now, right over here, I can see on a tree here, there's a inverted cross. Now, this is satanic. This is a very generic symbol. Let me see. It's actually fairly fresh too. This here, of course, is a bastardization of Christianity, and it's a very common symbol. Obviously, they probably had a party or a ritual here within the past night or two. Usually what they'll do is they'll mark, it's almost like a path. They'll mark a path to kind of show you where the action's at. The colors they'll use will be white, red, and black. Those are the dominant colors of the satanic movement. And basically, well, okay, over here, see? Here you go. This, well, see, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, what you're looking at here is called Voodoo Vivi. This is kind of like a coat of arms, if you will, for the demonic. And the implications of this is definitely satanic. When I showed you earlier the one pointed up star as we first came in, and I told you that, the implications of Satanism are 2 points up. As you can see, there are 2 points up here. And someone has made it very clear They were probably worshiping Set, because it says Set here, so it's pretty obvious. Now this here, if I'm not mistaken, looks like a money Vivi. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were here on the park doing a money ritual. And this is very typical. This is the kind of thing that you can expect to see not only on crime scenes, but in areas where occultists hang out. Like gang graffiti, occultists kind of communicate to each other through their graffiti. On the rise there, up here, is a very flat area, concrete area, that is used often. I even frequented it for ritual practice. Well, there you go. You can see from here 666 and an eye. Now that eye above 666 is an Egyptian eye, the eye of Anubis. So I can tell by looking at this eye that these people that were up here were into ceremonial magic. These aren't witches, these are definitely Satanists. Okay, here you go. Shem Hemfarash is a satanic invocation, and Halley is also part of a satanic invocation. There is a book out called The Greater Key of Solomon, and in The Greater Key of Solomon you will see on the seal of Solomon this word. All right, from what I can tell from the graffiti and everything that I've seen and what I see here on the concrete, it looks like they actually have the ritual here. Now there's an N here for north, and there's an S over here for south. Now, while these are not the true directions, obviously someone had a bad sense of direction, I'm assuming that this is where they actually had their ritual. One of the reasons why they would use this particular area to have a ritual is it is on concrete, and it's a nice open area. When we used to come up and have rituals, and we had a group, we would look for an open, flat space. This is an open, flat space. This would be an ideal place for them to have a ritual. Now, if I was a solo occult practitioner, I might do it in the bushes somewhere and have a little altar set up. So what you're doing is when you come onto a scene and you're investigating a scene, you look on the ground and you'll find clues as to what happened. Right here, okay, we have a rope here. This is a noose. And actually, if you look at it closely, I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but there's blood on this noose. Now, this could have been used either to bind someone up in some type of a ritual scourging, or it could have actually been used on an animal that was sacrificed. When sacrificing a cat or a dog, of course, animals move around a lot and they get unruly, so they would tie it up. But there is blood all over this particular noose. Now, these are the kind of things that you'd be looking for. What we have here is a medicine bottle of 2% xylocaine. For those of you with medical knowledge, you would know xylocaine, known as lidocaine, is a numbant. It's used to numb people, and for that matter, animals. And of course, if you're going to ritually sacrifice an animal, or a human for that matter, in a public place, you don't want them to be screaming in pain. So it's not uncommon for occultists to use something like this, and of course, here we have it. On this tree here, we have some more graffiti. It's in red, which is a classical satanic color. Now, what's interesting here is the number 9. 9 represents the 9 satanic statements. You can find this in a book by Anton Sandor LaVey, which is called the Satanic Bible, and you will see that there are 9 satanic statements. This is the way occultists tell each other, hey, we're Satanists and we're partying.
The 9 Satanic Statements from the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. Number 1, Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. Number 2, Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. Number 3, Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. Number 4, Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it, instead of love wasted on ingrates. Number 5, Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Number 6, Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. Number 7, Satan represents man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those that walk on all fours, who, because of his divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. Number 8, Satan represents all of the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. And number 9, Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years.
This is the symbol for the Church of Satan, and this is kind of like their crest, their coat of arms, if you will. This would imply that these people either have affiliations with the Church of Satan or perceive themselves to have affiliations with the Church of Satan. Everything that we've seen here indicates Satanism.
I sit on a council of 13 people that take orders only from the Rothschild Tribunal in London, which they claim they take their orders directly from Lucifer.
I was the manager of Zodiac Productions, which Zodiac Productions, its name's been changed since then. I'm not even sure what they call it now, but it's the largest music conglomerate in the world. It owns RCA Records, Columbia Records, Motown Records, owns almost all the concert booking agencies in the United States. And that's not even the name of the company that owns it. The name of the company that owns it is Brenner Enterprises, and Brenner Enterprises is owned by Chase Manhattan. Chase Manhattan's owned by Standard Oil, and Standard Oil is owned by the Lords of London. You can track it on back. You kind of get the idea after a while. But I was the managing president of Zodiac Productions. It's one of my jobs as being one of these 13 people. Thus, I got to know many of the people who produce music and sing the music and play the music that you play. Now, one of the closest friends that I got during that time that I obtained was a man named David Crosby. Crosby, Still, Nash & Young. I saw David the day before Christmas last year, talked with him. I got him away from this witch that he had with him. He told her to go shopping. We were in West Hollywood, and I was witnessing around to people I knew. We went off in this store, and we started talking. I said, David, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. I said, I already know the answers, but I've been gone for 5 years. I'd like to know if certain things are still the way they were when I left. I said, now I'll have to explain some of this when I'm done, because you're not going to understand it all unless you know something about music. I said, do they still take the master to the temple room? Dave said, yeah. I said, do they still have the coven conjure demons into the master? He said, of course. I said, now, I got to know something. What's the main reason for rock music? He said, come on, Lance, you know what the reason is. I said, please, David, I don't want to guess. Tell me what the main reason is. He says, the same as when you were in, so that we can play spells on people that we couldn't cast spells upon. I'll explain what that means in a minute. I said, okay, one last thing. I've been hearing that you must be an initiated witch now to get a record contract. He said, that's right. He says, many of us that weren't total witches have to be witches now in order to produce music. I said, thank you. The master is a tape about as big as the top of this podium that looks like an overgrown 8-track that the album is cut on, and it's placed in a machine that produces and presses the records and the 8-tracks and cassettes that you buy. After it's been recorded, it's taken in. This is why a master's cut months in advance before it's released. On the full moon, it's taken in to a temple room about the size of this auditorium that is in every one of the major music companies. behind locked doors up in the executive offices. And it's placed on an altar setting in the north of the room, and a pentagram engraved in the floor. And 13 hand-chosen witches and wizards and a coven come in and conjure a principality or a power up, usually Regia or something like that, and order him to tell the demons under him to follow every record and every tape coming off of that master.
I sold my soul to the devil. I know it's a crappy deal. This it came with a few toys like a Happy Meal.
You know, what was going on in my life at 15, and that's how I got introduced to the music industry. I swear I wanted to be like the Amy Grant of music. Yeah. But it didn't work out, and so I sold my soul to the devil.
How I came about being a lyricist is weird, because I started out technically, like I used to write all the time, you know, before I started going into the Rain Man thing, you know.
Why do you still do it? Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I mean, I made a bargain with it, you know, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with you know, with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And on this earth, and then in a world we can't see.
Yeah, well, sometimes they don't want to, and they're, you know, Gaga, we can't get, you know, the frequency's weird, and, you know, it's sounding a little bit strange, and I'm like, if you don't get this right now, I swear to Lucifer, I'm gonna, you know, I get a little bit mad, and I'm like, if you don't get this right now, I swear to Lucifer, I'm gonna.
What has this done to your career?
What has it done to my career?
What has it done to your career?
In what way?
How has it impacted, you know,
my
touring, record sales?
Album's #1 all over the world. All over the world. America's the only one because, I don't want to say too much.
But it's not #1 in the United States.
It's conspiracy, yeah. I don't want to say too much. I'm done. I don't want to say much because I'm hurting. I'm really hurting.
I had to ask some friends because I was hearing a lot about her, and so they told me, you know, who she was and what she was doing. And I come from the school of thought there's just some things that the public just shouldn't know. You know what I'm saying? Like things that happen between two people, a wife and a husband, girl. I just don't think that it's for mass consumption. I just have always felt that way, and I just think that the whole idea of celebrity and fame has become really convoluted and, you know, kind of bastardized, like whereas fame used to be the byproduct of success, and now it's the ultimate goal. And if your ultimate goal is to be famous, then you're gonna do a lot to get there, like sign your name in blood in a contract with the devil. Like you're gonna end up on a one-way street and it's going nowhere. Like that's just the truth. I've seen so many people like forsake their moral code and their value systems just for a little bit of fame, and it's not worth it at the end of the day. It's really not worth it.
Martin Lawrence is the
All right. You ready for our next excellent speaker? I had a good time with this guy the other night. We were actually discussing movies over a lot of tacos and enchiladas and salsa. And yeah, right? I noticed that Bastrop has like 20 Mexican restaurants and like one, that's it. There's like one other restaurant. Now, Olav, I thought I knew a lot about movies, but Olav put me to shame. He was telling me stuff that I had never heard of and didn't know anything about. So I think you're going to find a lot more depth and interesting connections that Olav's going to make. His piece is Something Wicked This Way Comes, the Secret Space Program's Endgame, or the Secret Space Program, What is the Endgame? So give a great, warm, hearty welcome for Olav Phillips.
I would be remiss if I didn't start my clock. I don't want to go too long.
Thank you for coming this morning. I know the clocks are reset. Before I get to too much, hang on. See if I can get my slides to show up. Before I get to too much, I do want to apologize. I'm an engineer. I'm a researcher. I am not a public speaker. So I'll do my best. Oops, see? A bit closer, okay. See, they're already telling me where to stand. Who am I? Like everybody else, I put up the CV of who I am. You can read that if you want to. Basically, I write stuff, I go on radio shows, and I come up with theories. Before I begin, this is a slide I put in every slide deck I've ever done. It's something I firmly believe. Don't believe me or anybody else up here. Don't believe anybody. Do it yourself. Anything that I'm going to tell you is a starting point. It's a starting point only. I want you to go out and take the time to actually figure it out for yourself. Okay, what is the secret space program? Excuse me, I have to read this. To me, I define the secret space fundamentally as a theory backed up by facts that a parallel space program exists outside the view or control of the populace. It exists in a multinational space and is supported by most industrialized nations, and is controlled by a parallel government structure which exists that we don't see. So one of the questions I get asked a lot when I do radio shows, and when I talk to people, is it aliens? Now, some of you may believe it is, some of you may not. It's open to conjecture. Nobody really knows. That's the truth. I'm going to give it to you straight, and nobody can tell you one way or the other. I have my own personal belief, and I will attempt to prove that to you. What I do, though, is that I utilize Occam's razor. This is a very, very old idea. And dumbing it down, I think Ptolemy put it best, that he says, we consider a good principle to explain phenomenon by the simplest hypothesis possible. Meaning that the more complex that you make something, the less likely it is that it's true. That being said, there are UFOs, and some of them may be alien. This is a very famous photo from McMinnville in the 50s. This is a more controversial shot from apparently Apollo 20. We can talk about that later if anybody wants to, but I enjoy it. This is also Apollo 20. The thing that always struck me about this is the iconography. I studied anthropology, and the iconography always gets me. I'm always looking for iconography because as humans, we tag things. It's just our nature. If you have a bomber, you put a picture of your girlfriend or your wife on the side of it, you name it after her, right? We name cars, we name boats, we name airplanes. Stephen Colbert has an airplane. Oh, you got that. Virgin America. But again, what's interesting about this one, they do, it's called the Colbert. So if you look at the iconography here, this is very Mayan, right? So if this is alien, this is very Mayan. That's very interesting. So who is it and what's the point? That's basically why I'm here. I don't think it's aliens. Welcome to Alternative 3, the blueprint for the end of the world. Alternative 3 is probably the most dangerous television show ever made. But why? Alternative 3 was the final episode in a long-running East Anglia television show. It was a hard science show called Science Report. It was intended for broadcast April 1st. That date's important. April 1st, 1977. It was actually aired June 20th, 1977 due to scheduling conflicts. There was a strike, people were confused. They aired it in June. Sorry. It was simulcast in 3 countries and caused a widespread panic, leading to legislation to prevent Alternative 3 from being re-aired. It was shown in Australia and subsequently banned. At the same time it was shown, it was optioned by NBC Drama. The head of NBC was in London at the time and caught an airing of it. He optioned it, meaning he bought rights to it, brought it back to America. He showed it to NBC Standards and Practices, which subsequently said that it was too dangerous to air. The only country, actually, that it can be aired on television is Japan. and is shown approximately once a year in Japan. It was directed by Christopher Miles, who became very famous in England. It was written by David Ambrose, who also became very famous. For anybody who likes ambient electronica, the soundtrack was done by Brian Eno, who's extremely famous. And it was on Music for Films. So if you go watch it, it's on YouTube. If you like the soundtrack, Music for Films. It's Alternative 3. One of the other interesting aspects, and this actually came out while I was talking to Joseph Farrell, he asked me what the pedigree was basically of the people who made the show. And the show was made by East Anglia Television. I didn't put this in. It was made by East Anglia Television, which was later acquired by ITV. ITV is owned by Rupert Murdoch. So for many of you, that should not be a surprise. So Alternative 3. It was presented by a man named Tim Brinton, who later became a member of Parliament and who was a well-respected TV presenter. So he was a news presenter, and what that means that he was basically a news host. So if you think of the guy sitting at the desk reading you the news, i.e. Walter Cronkite, that was Tim Brinton. In the UK, you cannot be a news presenter or a newscaster and be an actor. That may have changed now, but back then you couldn't be. And it was to precisely avoid what Alternative 3 did. That when you watch it, you think it's real because the guy telling you is the same guy who's on the BBC telling you the news. So what happened was that Tim Brinton actually left being a news presenter. He became an actor, did Alternative 3, and then went back to being a newscaster. Go figure. The show ostensibly dealt with the brain drain, which occurred in the UK in the 1970s. Many scientists and technicians were leaving the UK for greener pastures. During the filming, the researchers discover a secret plan to leave the Earth. Mayhem ensues as we learn the Earth will soon no longer be able to support life. But wait, the government is here to fix the problem. It has been claimed that it is a mockumentary, and it's not real. The people in it are actors. But it is a blueprint. The structure is fundamentally correct. Excuse me. In the film, Professor Ballantyne tells us that in 1957, there was a secret meeting where noted scientists became convinced that soon the Earth would experience climate instability and plunge into an ice age, and the world would effectively end. Now, in the film, when you watch this, when they talk about this, Ballantyne is a arrogant, egocentric professor type, and they're walking down this hallway. You can actually see it here. My laser pointer's working. You can see it here. Very a la Cambridge, Oxford. As they're talking about this, they start to show B-roll. For people who don't make movies or TV, B-roll is kind of like filler. And they're showing films of deserts and dead animals and ice ages and rains, and they're talking about, this place experienced flooding. Hey, we experienced flooding here. This, flooding, and this place is having no rain, and etc. So they're doing all this to reinforce it dramatically. Incidentally, in 1957, there was a meeting of the American Chemical Society in which a guy named Roger Revelle, who worked for the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, discovered oceans could process a mere 10% of the CO2 being generated in 1957. Now, his area of study was phytoplankton, and phytoplankton is often referred to as the CO2 scrubbers of the ocean. That we have this assumption that there's this huge mass of phytoplankton out in the ocean that's processing the CO2 that's being generated naturally, not naturally, whatever, but it's processing it. Well, in 57, he discovered that it wasn't. In short, we had a problem. As Revelle wrote, human beings are now carrying out a large-scale geophysical experiment of a kind that could not have happened in the past nor be reproduced in the future. An experiment which would lead to large-scale greenhouse effects, which would heat up the entire planet, amongst other things. In effect, Revelle had discovered global warming in 1957. So what does Alternative 3 tell us? Remember, I said the government's here to help. So the date of 1957 obviously wasn't a coincidence. They came out of that meeting with 3 main alternatives. There we go. Alternative 1, to set off a high-altitude nuclear device to blow a hole in the atmosphere and vent CO2 into space. Nobody's laughing yet. Okay, thank you. So it sounds insane. They really did try it. I'll get to that in a second. It sounds completely insane, but these are the same guys that came up with plowshares, where they wanted to use high-yield nuclear weapons to build harbors and to make canals. And they actually carried out a test in Alaska. They set off a nuclear device, and they created a beautiful harbor, beautiful deep harbor. The problem is you can't use it for 10,000 years. The second alternative, I call it alternative 1.5, is geoengineering on a mass scale. The second alternative, or the third alternative actually, build massive underground bunkers. The alternative 3, leave by way of the moon to go to Mars to recolonize until the Earth is stabilized. Now, one thing you're probably asking yourself right about now is where do I fit into this? You don't. Alternative 1, set off a high-yield, high-altitude nuclear device. Welcome to Project Argus. It's actually Hardtack Argus, if anybody wants to look it up. Hardtack. In 1958, just 1 year after the supposed meeting, Task Force 88 was formed to execute Project Argus Hardtack Argus Floral. It also has the name Floral. I thought that was funny. Its mission was to fire 2 missiles into the upper atmosphere near the geologic equator at the highest over 4,000 miles up to detonate a 2-kiloton nuclear device to create an artificial radiation belt similar to the Van Allen radiation belt, which protects our planet from radiation. The project was completed within 6 months, where normal projects took over 2 years. Now I want to get into that for a second. These projects, when you want to assemble a task force, anybody who's ever been in the Navy would probably know this, that you don't just assemble a task force. It just doesn't work that way. You've got dozens of ships. Each ship has to have a specialty. I get more into it in the book, but each ship literally had a specialty. The ships that went out there, they had the latest radar. They had the latest of all these technologies. These were the most high-tech ships that we could front from a scientific point of view. So 6 months is not long. That's short. The other thing that I want to point out about Hardtack Argus is that when they carried it out in 1958, it was hailed as one of the greatest experiments ever carried out in the history of science, because they did successfully create the artificial Van Allen radiation belt. The problem is that the guys who were saying that it was the greatest experiment ever were read into the project, and they were government scientists, because this project was classified until the 80s. That makes you wonder what they were really doing out there. So from an alternative 3 point of view, this project was a failure, because obviously blowing a hole in the atmosphere and venting carbon dioxide is asinine. Welcome to alternative 1.5, geoengineering on a massive scale. So it's actually global dimming, but it's what you guys call chemtrails. The notion is very simple, that you enter material into the upper atmosphere to reflect light back into space. This lowers the temperature of the Earth, and it changes the overall albedo or reflectivity of the Earth. This is ongoing. This is a patent. This is patent 5,104,069. This was issued to Boeing. Boeing's important because they built 7 X-7 aircraft, 737s, 747s, 757s, 777s, 787s, Boeing. The apparatus shown is a method for injecting a material from an aircraft, basically a sprayer. The release mechanism could be coupled with a device to filter material out from the fuel, then eject it into the air where it mixes with the contrail. One of the things that's interesting in chemtrail research is that nobody's ever found the fleet. Now you're talking about a fleet of aircraft that are covering large cities across the entire world. It takes a fleet of aircraft to do that. Nobody's ever found it. To my knowledge, nobody's ever found a pilot who says that they're actually a chemtrail pilot who can prove it. There are photos that float around of a spraying plane where you see the inside of the fuselage. And what you're going to see is a whole bunch of tanks connected by tubes and then a pumping device. That's not chemtrail spraying. That's actually testing the balance of the aircraft when they're testing its flight dynamics. So what I would posit to you is that the material is mixed into the jet fuel and that the pilots don't know they're spraying it. Now, I know what I'm saying might be controversial to some of you, but here's the proof. It's a little hard to see, but if you look at this graph, you'll see that it's jagged, but that's okay. If you deal with a lot of graphs and performance characteristics of things, I'm an IT engineer, so I see graphs like this all the time. The jagged is okay, but what you're looking for is a linear pattern. And it's a linear pattern that shows the temperature of the surface of the Earth is linearly increasing. It's not what we call hockey sticking. It's just linearly increasing, okay? But what's important here is that you see the temperature, and this is the 1800s, and let's remember what Walter Bosley was talking about. So you see the 1800s here, you see industrialization, you see it start to increase. Goes along fairly steady. Then right around late 1950s, 1960, it plummets, okay? And then you see it rises, and then it's a little hockey sticky, and then it drops, and then, now this jaggedness that you see is probably error correction. When you're carrying out a global spraying program, right, you're gonna make mistakes, because we're all human. So this is them attempting to correct the mistakes, right? Or this is because of outside influence, be it a volcano, whatever. But this is, the part that I want to point out is right here. This is right about the same time that Roger Revelle revealed that we were no longer processing things with the phytoplankton. This is what it looks like. Now, one interesting thing of note is that a lot of times people think, I'm interested by chemtrails, right? And everybody's gonna think I'm crazy. You know, I go out and I tell my friends, see all those persistent contrails? They're gonna think I'm nuts. Actually, I saw a BET interview with Prince. If anybody, you guys listen to Prince. Prince actually said in a BET interview that over Minneapolis, where he's from, that he noticed starting in the 1970s that the persistent contrails started to form. That's Prince. He's famous, and he said it on BET. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cough. The other thing that's important about this, and I was having a conversation about this just earlier with Joseph Farrell, but one of the things that you'll notice is that the most dense concentration of this kind of geoengineering occurs over population centers. And people are trying to understand why. Well, the answer to that is simple. One of the things that you notice about this kind of scenario is that as more light passes through and hits the Earth, if it hits a cornfield and it hits dirt, the dirt absorbs it and it kind of dissipates. But if it hits a city, there's a thing called the heat island effect, where the concrete soaks up the heat and radiates it back out. The way that this manifests is that here in Ballstrop, this is a fairly population undense place. There's a lot of dirt. So the temperature here, on average, would probably be anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees lower than if you went into Austin, where there's a lot of concrete. So that's why you see more dense spraying over population centers, because that they're trying to offset that heat island effect. The other thing that's important about global dimming, and that's actually its name. If you Google global dimming, you'll find it. In the days after 9/11, right, they grounded all the aircraft in the United States, basically in North America. A lot of scientists became very excited, atmospheric scientists, and they went outside and they said, oh no, or oh yes, actually. They grounded all the aircraft, let's float some balloons and see what's going on. And the skies were clear, no chemtrails, right? Geoengineering. So they found that the temperature actually rose over a 5 or 7-day period by a degree or more, and that the ambient light hitting the surface of the Earth increased dramatically. It was much brighter. So global dimming is actually a very real thing. There are plenty of graphs that you can look at. There's plenty of science data about it. And not all science data is bad. You know, in the case of global dimming, it's pretty good. Sorry about that. Alternative 2, build massive underground bases. I don't think anyone here needs to be told that we are building massive underground bases. COG, or continuity of government construction, has progressed at an alarming rate for almost 50 years or more. But the status is a failure. Now, why is that a failure? The answer is simple. You cannot build enough bunkers fast enough to hold 350 million people, and that's in the United States alone. But what it is there's enough to hold the people with the money. We'll get to that in a minute. This is Site R. This is Raven Rock. This is one of the really big ones. One of the features that I like most about this COG bunker is it has a Starbucks. So when you hit the end of the world, if you need a latte, they got you covered. There's also a gift shop, so I'm assuming that you can get t-shirts. Well, you have to figure you're going to live subterraneally for 10 to 20 years. You know, you need Starbucks and you need t-shirts. This is FEMA. This is Mount Weather. This is one of the largest underground bunkers in existence. It's Virginia. And actually, I'm nervous, so it escapes me right now. But there's a COG facility that was that's under a hotel out there, and I think it's in West Virginia. You can actually tour it. Yeah, it's impressive. But the key to what you want to look for with underground bunkers is not underground bunkers. The DUMBs, the deep underground military bunkers that you're looking for, are continuity of government facilities, COGs. Look for COGs. This is Svalbard. This is the Global Seed Vault. And I would ask you, if nothing's wrong, why do we have a seed vault? Way north. It's a very complex facility. It's very cold. They store a lot of seeds. This is the airfield next to Svalbard. It's pretty big. So you can land a pretty decent sized aircraft there. Now, if Svalbard was alone, I might think to myself, well, they're trying to store non-GMO seeds. So who knows, maybe somebody at Monsanto goes crazy and genetically mismodifies some seeds to die on demand or whatever. So they want to build something like Svalbard to protect that, to keep what they call heritage seeds, right? Heirloom as well. It's not the only one. This is the Millennium Seed Bank in West Sussex, UK. Most of the seed vault is actually underground. This is what you can see on Google Earth. This is the Institute of Plant Industry, St. Petersburg, in the Russian Federation. This is the National Center for Genetic Resource Preservation. I like the name. Fort Collins, Colorado. And look, this one has a track, in case you want to run. Now, the important part about this is that as you look at all these facilities, these are all over the world. US, Russian Federation, UK, Scandinavia. And this is not all of them. These are the big ones. There's approximately 14 more small ones. I didn't want to load up my presentation with satellite photos of seed vaults, so I just stopped at these. But there are 14 more. In fact, the one in the Philippines was destroyed when Mount Pinatubo went off. So again, there are a bunch of these. So let's get to Elon Musk. I like Elon Musk. I'm an engineer, and I appreciate what he's doing for STEM, for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's something that we as a culture need to focus on. We need more engineers, we need more scientists, more technicians, and more mathematicians. We don't do a good job of training them. But how do you move things covertly? That's one of the big problems of the secret space program or any kind of covert operations. How do you move things covertly? An underground rail system would be a fantastic way to do it. But is it possible? I mean, really possible. I'm not standing up here telling you things that are impossible. I'm telling you things that are possible. Elon Musk has proposed a high-speed vacuum-sealed rail system between San Francisco and Los Angeles. I'm sure you guys have read about it. Achieves a speed of somewhere around 14,000 miles an hour. You can do San Francisco to Los Angeles in like half an hour, something like that. But he wasn't the first. This is a high-speed rail network proposed by R.M. Stiller of the Rand Corporation, August 1972. Now you'll notice the yellow line is the main line, right here. Yeah, all the big ones. This pattern will be important in a little bit. So kind of commit this kind of shape to memory, okay? I'll get to that in a minute. So then you'll see that there are stub lines that come off of it. Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Jacksonville. You'll see these stub lines. In fact, there's a huge stub line that goes up to Portland and Seattle. The green dots basically represent terminals of some sort. But these big yellow ones, that's the main line. Yeah. Now, Stiller said that he could achieve speeds as high as 14,000 miles an hour in the studies that he did, which means that you could do New York to Los Angeles in 21 minutes. But how big of a train could you build? Small, big? This is a nuclear-powered borer. This is what they use to build cog facilities and underground rail networks. I'll just let you look at that for a second. That's really big. And they're very efficient, and they use them quite a bit. One of the theories that I heard is that the Taos hum that a lot of people have heard is actually caused by a rail line, stub line that goes under Taos. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff. I think this part's fun. Alternative 3, leave by way of the moon and to Mars to recolonize. This is the genesis of the secret space program as we understand it. Nothing less than the evacuation of select individuals to Mars by way of the moon, and it's happening now. Now, one of the things that a lot of people want to discuss is why. What's going to happen? I don't know. I'm not here to tell you that. I'm just here to tell you what they're doing. Possible options: climatic collapse due to thermonuclear warfare, most unlikely, I think of a lot. Climate change due to various factors, including natural cycles, probably pretty far up there. Asteroid impact, i.e. Apophis, in 2036, 2068, could be likely. Something we don't know about, very likely. Now, what's interesting is about Apophis, this guy, right? There's a fantastic interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson where he goes through what would happen if Apophis hits what's called a keyhole. I think it's like a 100-kilometer window. Depending on where it hits in that window is depending on how much damage it's going to do. If it hits it nail on, then it's going to sandblast the West Coast. But what I always tell people is pick your favorite theory. This is the M Project. This is the genesis of Alternative 3. Commissioned in 1940 by Franklin Roosevelt as a black project. And he actually called it a black project with $180,000. Now that's $3.1 million adjusted for inflation. So that tells you how much money we've lost since 1940. It was led by a very famous, totally rich anthropologist by the name of Henry Fields. Henry Fields is Fields Museum in Chicago, Fields Department Store, amongst other things. Fields employed 32 researchers and several secretaries, and it's actually interesting that they break it apart. FDR's purpose was to study the relocation of large populations due to war, famine, or climatic event, because The disconnected can and will cause trouble, serious trouble. No climate was considered too harsh for evaluation, and they went everywhere from the British Congo to places in Russia. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. The eventual conclusion is what's actually very interesting, is that according to the M Project, which sat on a shelf for a long time, they suggested moving to Mars or Venus because Alpha Centauri was too far. I like that. So this is the moon. We all see it most nights, cloud cover permitting, or if it's a new moon. But it's a very interesting place. Moon bases. I know this is what everybody wanted. Moon bases sounds crazy, right? But it's not. Project Horizon, a U.S. Army project to build a moon base by 1967. Now remember these dates and compare them to the Apollo. The Apollo mission. The base would have offensive and defensive capabilities and was staffed by a crew of over 200 specially trained Army soldier astronauts by 1965. Again, as we have seen, the project was publicly killed off, but that doesn't mean that it stopped. Not to be outdone by the Army, the Air Force had their own plan called Project Lunex. Lunex was the Air Force plan. It called for a crew of 21 to live in an underground defense station at a cost of $7.5 billion. The interesting part of the project is that it predated the Apollo program, and in operation would explain why moon hoax theories exist. Not to be outdone, the Soviets came up with their own plan, Zvezda. Zvezda had the hallmarks of Horizon and Lunex. One of the differences is that in Horizon, the Army, being the Army, they wanted to take the fuel tanks of the vehicles that they used to get there, and they wanted to bury them and then use them like bunkers. The Air Force Lunex program actually had more of a landing component. So it had a main ship that would land on struts vertically, and then the people would get out, build a moon base, but they would live in this structure, this ship on struts, until they had completed the moon base. Zvezda was more of the model of Horizon, where they wanted to reutilize the fuel tanks to build underground bunkers. A lot of underground bunkers. So what about transient lunar phenomenon? For anybody who's not familiar, TLP is marked by light spontaneously appearing on the surface of the moon, and it's been seen by reputable scientists. This map shows an example of TLP reports on the near side of the moon. It should also be noted that TLPs have been reported since the 1800s, but most likely that was caused by atmospheric or misidentification. As you can see, there are a lot of them, and they grow. And they happen now, and they continue to happen to this day. So if I'm going to tell you that there are people on the moon, I should be able to prove that, right? Those are tracks. That's a vehicle. You can see the tracks. There's more tracks over in here. This is supposedly a lunar mining unit. This is the URL if you want to go download it yourself. By the way, I'm going to make my slide deck publicly available. You guys can download it off the website in a couple days. No problem. This is another track. After the lecture, if anybody can tell me what that is besides a track, let me know. But that's a track. That I can't tell you. It's pretty big though. And you know, if you think about the moon, mining would be great because supposedly there's titanium, there's helium-3 for power, there's a whole bunch of exotic minerals up there. So it'd be fantastic to mine it. Most long-term programs like Horizon and Lunex assume some level of mining to sustain activities on the moon. Back then, they weren't talking about helium-3 as a power source, but today they talk about helium-3 as a power source. But they definitely wanted to get the titanium and some of the other materials out of the moon and to smelt it. But let's not stop at the moon. We got to go to Mars, right? Because that's where we're all going to end up. Well, some of us. I call that the facility. You can't see it. It's right there. Now, when you download the image here, this sticks out like a sore thumb. One of the things that you'll notice when you look at the high-resolution image not projected, if you blow it up, there's a lot of texture because rock and sand, which is Mars, has a lot of texture. You can see it all around here. This is perfectly smooth. And in the high-resolution photo, not projected, you can see there's actually a reflection here, and that this circular thing is a dome, but there's actually light reflection from it. This is the Mars monolith. Here's the URL. Try to remember that. Again, if anybody can tell me what that is that's naturally occurring, I'm all ears. They call this the Mars Monolith Graveyard. There's the URL. Malin Space Sciences, my favorite guys. Now, one of the other things that's called for in the alternative 3 scenario, since we're talking about the moon and Mars, is this notion of batch consignments. Batch consignments are basically people that are kidnapped, taken to the moon and Mars to function as slave labor. That's how we do things. So what you see here is a composite of 2 maps. The bottom map, the one with all the marks on it, that's by David Paulides, or Paulides, I'm sorry. I always butcher his name, a fantastic researcher. But he documents disappearances in national parks. So what you see there is disappearances in national parks. What you see overlaid on top of it, these lines, it doesn't show up well, but these lines are actually, these are the states, right? And you see this line right here? If I wasn't so nervous, I'd do it straight. This is a rail network, and then these circles are terminals. This one's an anomaly. I got to figure that one out. But if you look in a lot of these areas where there are a lot of disappearances, pretty close by there's a terminal. So what does that tell you? It tells you that people disappear and they go into the rail terminal and they really disappear. And one of the interesting things, I was talking to Jay Widener about this, that that a lot of these disappearances that Paulides, sorry, I apologize, David. A lot of the disappearances that he's shown are either people that have no reason for disappearing, they're just common people, they're mechanics or they work on HVAC or whatever, and then there are people with high IQs. The people with high IQs are not batch consignments, they're recruited. Now in alternative 3, this is shown, there's a scientist that they follow. One day, she tells her family, hey, I'm gonna go for a trip. She drives to Heathrow, she leaves her car in the parking lot, leaves her wallet, leaves her keys, takes her bag, and she's gone, never to reappear. This actually happens, and it happens in these spots. Scientists, people with high IQs, like north of 150, 160, they happen here. The other thing you have to remember about this map, when you look at anomalies like this, is that this map is from 1990. So this map is 25 years old. So chances are that here, they built another terminal. Right. But let's not stop at the moon or Mars. Let's talk about space stations. There are two main space stations that I can kind of prove to you. One is called the MOL, the Manned Observation Lab. It was an Air Force project to build and later deploy a manned battle station equipped with a laser. The 2-man crew, both Air Force astronauts, and yes, the Air Force does have its own separate astronaut corps that's not NASA. They were designated to spend 6 months aboard and to function in a capacity of a battle station. The Almaz is the Russian version. This for sure went into space. It had a cannon, 23 millimeter cannon. I actually knew a guy in the Russian space program who was telling me about how they had to re-engineer the thrusters to counteract the recoil of the cannon when they'd fire it because they fired it. This is my favorite, and I dedicate this to Jay Dyer. That's Hugo Drax's space station, right there, seen in a SOHO image. That's a U.S. Air Force NASA concept from 1960. If you can tell me what's naturally occurring about that, I would love to talk to you. So how do we get there? And this is the big question that everybody wants to answer. As everybody's pointed out, there are competing theories about how we get there. You have multiple breakaway civilizations. You have multiple groups within breakaway civilizations. The Nazis are one of them. I don't know how much detail I need to go into about this. I think you guys have probably already all read Joseph Farrell's excellent work, or Igor Witowski, Nick Cook. But the guy you want to talk about is this guy, Hans Kammler. Hans Kammler ran the program. These are very dense slides. I'm going to kind of go through it super quick. I recommend you download them when I upload them because his background's very interesting. Because Kammler, a lot of times when we talk about Kammler, we just say, well, he's a Nazi general and he ran the Bell program at Der Riese. I'm going to butcher all the German. I'm sorry, I speak Spanish. But he ran the program at Der Riese, the giant. He was an ardent Nazi. He was a very bad person. And he had a PhD in engineering, so that's why he did it. That's wrong. Well, it's all right, but that's not why. His engineering degree was in civil engineering. But what he was an ardent Nazi. I mean, through and through. When you talk about some of the terrible things that the SS did, Kammler was actually assigned to destroy the Warsaw Ghetto, if you're familiar with World War II history. He actually was personally assigned by Himmler to destroy the Warsaw Ghetto, and he kept meticulous notes of everything that he did. He later unseated Göring as the head of special weapons projects, and he built Peenemünde, Nordhausen. He was in charge of these facilities, and he built them. He was also highly efficient, which explains his diverse use of labor in the scientist pool in the development of the Bell. So I'm not even going to try to read all that to you guys. You're just going to get bored. So please download it, and it's in the book. This, of course, is the Bell, the Glocke. I can explain to you how it works if you want to, but you probably already read the book. I put it in here in case you guys have never seen it before, but I assumed you had. This is the henge, supposedly. This is where they would tether the bell when they tested it. This is where it gets interesting. This is the Haunebu 2, actually, that is supposedly representative of the German flying saucer program powered by the Bell. Now, I want you to remember the shape. I put it in here because this shape becomes very important in a couple minutes. Of course, after the war, we had Project Paperclip. There's Werner von Braun hanging out with his friends. There's Werner von Braun hanging out with his friends. Oh, he was a mainstay in Disney. When Disney went out and did the programming around the conquest of space and all this, Werner von Braun was a mainstay telling you how the space program works because he already knew, because he built it. All right, then a few years later we get this stuff. This is George Adamski, probably fake, but look at the shape. How would Adamski know what that's supposed to look like? I ask you. Interesting thing about the contactee era is, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Again, a few years later, we have a different type. They're constantly evolving and changing. But the Haunebu type is very specific, and that will become important in just a moment. We also have this, the T-588. This is the lenticular reentry vehicle. This thing's bizarre. But it came out at about the same time that the Air Force was developing a lot of things. And they were all developed by these guys. Who developed that? Oops. All right. So what happened to Kamler? That's the big, $64,000 question, or adjusted for inflation, $64 million question. What happened to him and the other guys after the war? They went off the farm. Maybe they went off the planet. I think we see competing interests. On one hand, I believe we have found over time that there is a Nazi or Nazi 2.0 component, which is extraplanetary, but there is also an Earth-based component as well, both breakaway civilizations. This would explain SDI systems which are in orbit. This would explain armed battle stations and the Solar Warden Space Navy. One important thing to talk about with SDI, I spoke to an SDI engineer. Always happens this way, the last 5 minutes of a radio show I was on called Ground Zero, and he called in and he said, hey, I'm a aerospace engineer from the Pacific Northwest, and I worked on a program in the mid-1970s, and I was guarded by federal marshals. And he said the program that he worked on was to build a constellation of three satellites. One was a hunter-killer, and two were laser platforms that circled the globe equatorially. The hunter-killer was actually mobile. It'd move itself around using some sort of rudimentary AI system. This is important because he said he put it into orbit in 1977. By the way, in case you haven't seen it, this is from a movie called Iron Sky, and that would be predictive programming. One of the other important things is that we always ask is, where did Kamler go? There have been persistent rumors of a thing called Base 211 that exists in Antarctica, a place called New Schwabenland, which is where the German and Nazi Arctic expeditions went, but nobody can seem to figure out how they got there. This is a map, shows you the rough straight line. Remember, shortest distance, 2 points, straight line, but it's curved for the curvature of the Earth. It's roughly 10,000 miles. This is how they did it. This is a Junkers 390. It's actually quite a huge plane. You can get an idea because the cockpit's right there. I had a crew of 10. You can see it has a range of roughly 6,000 miles, but that's not 10,000, so we got a problem, right? Here's a solution. There's a thing called a Junkers 290, which is a little smaller, and according to legend, it actually carried out refueling exercises in the August of 1943, or actually the 390 was used as a reconnaissance aircraft in August of 1943, and it flew into Canada, but it was refueled by a 290. So the Germans and the Nazis at that time had mid-air refueling. Now, if you look at this map, you got to make 6,000 miles, which is a little over halfway. So we're going to think it's somewhere around Argentina. I know. And remember, they don't have, what happens to the remember we're talking about ideologues. So what happens to the 290 after it refuels? It ditches, they run away, probably it relands in certain parts of Argentina, and the people disappear. This is the U-234, another option. This U-234 was originally designed as a mine layer. The Germans had quite a number of different kinds of U-boats, but this was a mine layer that was converted into a cargo U-boat. After the war, well, when the crew of the U-234 found out that the Germans had surrendered, the Nazis had surrendered, they made a beeline for Newport News, Virginia, because they wanted to give up. And on board, when it was captured, I've got to read this part. On board, they found it was carrying a new kind of electric torpedo, a crated Messerschmitt 262, which is the first real jet aircraft, an HS-293 glide bomb, which is kind of like a cruise missile, sort of, like a very simple version, 1,200 pounds of uranium oxide, 50 lead tubes. It was also carrying 1 Luftwaffe general, 4 German naval officer, a large number of scientists and engineers, as well as 2 Japanese naval attaches. The Japanese attaches committed suicide ritually on right before they were captured. Its destination was Japan, but it had enough fuel to run for an additional 6 to 9 months. Remember, I was talking about iconography. As humans, we like to label things. It's just our nature. We catalog, we label. Well, we label. This is back in the mid-'70s. There was a article written in Saga, if anybody remembers that magazine. I forget the guy's name. It's in the book, but I forget the guy's name. But he actually went through and cataloged iconography seen on UFOs. These are seen on UFOs. This thing right here is a wolf's angle symbol used by the National Socialist Movement of the Netherlands. This looks like the British Union of Fascists. And it goes on from there. There's more. But the reason why it's important is that neither of these are German, but they're both fascists. What you see is a collection of symbols that are both German and fascist. You see Vichy, French fascists, you see British fascists, Irish fascists. You see all these kinds of symbols on the UFOs, especially around the contactee era. This is interesting. During the contactee era, there's a thing called a Nordic. The Nordics are supposed to stand between 6 and 7 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eye. This is a picture of one with Adamski. Adamski claimed that he met a number of Nordics. This is really interesting. That's Valiant Thor. I think that's Valiant Thor. No, that's Valiant Thor and that's Commander Dawn. I always get them confused, I'm sorry. But there's a bigger question. If I'm an alien, why do I name my son Valiant Thor, brave god of thunder in Norse mythology? That's a good question. Then this is Asket. But you see the representation is always the same. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, 6, 7 feet tall. Now, what's interesting about Valiant Thor here, I'm pretty sure that's Commander Dawn. What's interesting about Valiant Thor is that Valiant Thor went with Frank Strange's, Dr. Frank Strange's. He went to the Pentagon. And you can, if you dig, you can find the entry and exit of these guys from the Pentagon. They really went to the Pentagon. Why? Another question I get asked a lot is about crop circles. What are they? Are they alien? Maybe, maybe not. That's not alien. That's the black sun. The black sun is an occult symbol. This is from Wewelsburg Castle. This is Himmler's headquarters for the SS. This is actually in the floor. This is a crop circle from Wiltshire from August of this year. Now there's one big difference. This right here. I don't know what that is. And it's not present on this. This has one wheel. Well, it has more than one wheel, right? You can see there are interlocking wheels. This has the same interlocking wheels until you get to this part. There's an outer wheel that doesn't exist. But this is a message. This is a message to somebody. Now, Jay Dyer was talking about predictive programming. Like many people of my generation, I play video games. I'm not sorry. I like it. This is a sign I found in the game Wolfenstein: The New Order. Now, I've been playing Wolfenstein since I was a little kid. So I saw the new Wolfenstein came out, and I had to have it. So I'm playing, and at one point, you're fighting inside of a museum. And it's a museum of science and technology. And I'm going through, killing off the bad guys, and I see this on the wall. So I think to myself, well, I've got to finish the mission first, right? So I nail all the bad guys, and I circle around to this. Now, I'm not even going to attempt the German, but translated it says, next stop Venus, an exhibition about space and how to conquer it. Experience an extraordinary adventure and explore with us the mysterious planet Mars. Oh, wait, I thought it was Venus. Closest our goal. I could have gotten the translation wrong. I think I got that pretty right. This stuff down here is really small. But you can see this is a representation of Venus, rocket, and it was found inside of a Nazi museum in the game of Wolfenstein. Space planes. I'm going to skip all that. This is an interesting one, and it's actually a video. You can find it. I can help you if you want. This is a triangular aircraft. It's not a UFO. It's one of ours. It flies over a star. And as it flies over the star, as it approaches, well, it's kind of like that, the star shimmers and then is projected on the base of the aircraft. So it actually takes it from above, passes it through, and projects it down below. It's adaptive camouflage. This is a triangular aircraft that was seen out of another plane. Again, it's a video. And you see this triangular aircraft, which you can't really see, it's triangular here, starts weaving in and out of the clouds. This is a high altitude aircraft. No, it's not an A-12, it's too big. It's also not an Aurora. It demonstrates no pulse detonation engine. I think this is an Aerospike engine, which has to operate at high altitude and probably could be used for suborbital flights. But these things usually fly about 70,000 feet or more. This is another one seen on a different day. You can see a persistent contrail. Now, the key of why this is not an Aurora, and I've actually seen an Aurora at ECETI, the reason why is because there's no donuts on a rope. There's no pop line, pop line, pop line. So this is a solid contrail that you can see the beginnings of the contrail here. This tends to show that there are two engines, but I think it's an Aerospike. This is the quote-unquote Black Knight. I don't think that's an alien. That's another photo of it. This was from an ISS feed before NASA cut the video feed. Now I was talking about iconography. This was seen on a UFO. I didn't know that they could write in English. And that's UN. And this is from 1957. The guy couldn't make out the rest. But Haskell, he saw UN. And there are more. There are red stars. One of them says like UK. I mean, there's a lot of them. We label this stuff. So now in my final minutes, the $64 million question, who's behind it? That's who's behind it. But why? To survive. This is from Forbes. It shows from this year, there are 1,826 billionaires, which is a world record, by the way. This group, distributed by country, controls a total of over $7 trillion. And it actually increased from 6.4 trillion last year. So they made an additional, what, 0.6 trillion and change. So another, 600 billion. But you can see that the distribution is concentrated in the West, but really there are billionaires everywhere. Well, there are chunks of Africa that don't have them, but there are billionaires pretty much everywhere. So what's the end game? Let us assume for the moment that something is coming, whatever it might be. The powers that be know and try to stop it, fix it, mitigate it, and those attempts have failed. They would, of course, tell their friends, and they would, of course, do anything to survive. According to the M Project, and what we have seen ourselves in places like New Orleans, is that society is 3 days away from total breakdown. No food, no water, no structure reduces us to barbarism. The powers that be know this, and they're seeking a way to flee using the $7 trillion, their friends, and special access programs to do it. Snowpiercer. It's actually not that bad of a movie. Very apocalyptic. Alternative 3 is the nuclear option, meaning the worst option. Knowing they cannot sustain their vision of a utopian society, they have instead set a plan in motion with others in and out of various governments to go somewhere and wait it out. Mars seems like the destination for most, but ones left on the earth will most likely create enclaves of heavily armed and rigid societies while they wait for us to shrink down to the stated 300 million population size in the West, while using less developed countries as forced labor. It's pretty apocalyptic, I know, but I believe it's true. Now this is important. 300 million, right? Georgia Guidestones, Agenda 21, pick your poison. I think that 300 million represents the West. I think that in less developed parts of the world, they're not trying to decrease the population, they're letting it rise. We can argue that, but I think that you'll see over time that the population indeed rises. So what are my conclusions? What I've shown here today is a model set up by the Alternative 3 film. I've attempted to provide you with a discussion of the means, motive, and opportunity of this parallel group. I have attempted to show Alternative 3 is in progress and what that means. Space Nazis, I think the breakaway civilization has at least two factions. The Earthbound group and a more nefarious Nazi group that has been operating out of Base 211 and other locations in South America and maybe other places. War in space, I think as can be seen in STS-48, that a war of some sort is taking place in space. SDI systems such as Project Thor, Brilliant Pebbles, Space Warden, Solar Warden, I left that one out, and others have been deployed to target external threats. Why? Overpopulation, pollution, potential foreknowledge of a catastrophic mass moving in our direction, such as Apophis. It doesn't entirely matter. Take your pick. They're all bad, but it's coming. So I thought I'd end it this way. We've all read this, right? This is, he stated at least twice about how we'd all come together if there are threats from an external source. But this isn't the quote that matters. This quote doesn't matter at all. I would argue to you that whether he said it or not, whether Gorbachev was there or not, it didn't matter. That's the one that matters. That's my presentation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Olav. One more time.
Israel, Zion, the land of Canaan and Palestine. This sliver of land, which runs along the Mediterranean Sea, has been called by many names. This seemingly endless span of desert and mountainous terrain has been the center of religious and political conflict throughout millennia. This small nation is home to more than 5 million Jews and is estimated to be a third of the global Jewish population. Against all odds, these people have transformed this once arid wasteland into a nation flowing with life, industry, and agriculture. But hidden within the ancient ruins and remnants of ageless conflict and bloodshed is a treasure beyond value that countless individuals have risked their lives to obtain. What they seek are the ancient records that contain a detailed account of past civilizations, global change, and belief systems near the birth of modern language and the origin of law.
Their recorded history begins and continues long before any of the other recorded histories of the world. The Egyptians and the Mayans and some of the other individual groupings of people that we often hear about as ancient. According to the Jewish record, there are none more ancient than the Jews.
It spanned, of course, the Egyptian empires, and it still existed. And yet somehow they maintained this written record that was contiguous, that went all the way through for 1,600 years, even though the greatest of the empires in the world came and went during that time.
How history was preserved within the ancient records is revolutionary. The records are so old that the originals are believed to have decayed into dust, since parchment, which is used in the construction of scrolls, deteriorates. The ancient Jews clearly understood this and followed meticulous methods to periodically make copies of their records over the course of thousands of years. For many researchers, this brought into question the level of accuracy from the scrolls. One might expect a percentage of compounding errors, as the records are continually copied and passed from one generation to the next. What scholars discovered continued to separate the ancient Jewish scriptures from all other records throughout ancient history and confirmed the validity of the scrolls.
The oldest Hebrew text we had was called the Masoretic text. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And the time between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text is 1,000 years. And there are some differences, but they're very, very minor. And those minor differences do not change the actual content of that verse. Between saying he went to Jerusalem, he went unto Jerusalem. To and unto, that's how slight the variant is. But it doesn't change the meaning. The man went to Jerusalem.
The Jewish scribes were meticulous in copying those things. They could not be casual about it whatsoever. They had very strict rules. They had to count every letter. They had to go to the middle letter. They had to make sure everything they did, if they made a mistake, they had to note that mistake in the margin. They had to throw the document away. And that dedication was able to provide for us an Old Testament that is right and true and very accurate as according to that which was written the first time. No other source in history, no other literature in history comes close to the accuracy of the Jewish scriptures.
It's through the comparison of various discovered copies, including those made within the more modern Dead Sea Scrolls, that we realize the ancient Jewish records, regardless of age, accurately preserves the text in its most original and purest form. But it doesn't stop there.
Other nations do not record their defeats. The Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian doesn't matter. You'll have continuous records of successes, but not defeats and not failings.
In ancient cultures, history was also recorded as a means of glorifying the kings, pharaohs, Caesars, and leaders of the day. However, the ancient Jewish records provided history with a different viewpoint.
Concerning Israel's recorded history from ancient times, if you compared the Israel's records with records of other nations, in Jewish records, they record the successes, they record the failings. Because if they were just trying to record nationalism or patriotism, they wouldn't record their failings of their kings.
They attempted to maintain consistent interpretation and unbiased accuracy, regardless of Israeli rulers, their actions, or social changes. But these ancient scriptures differ in yet another extraordinary way.
When I was over in Israel, one of the things that impressed me is one of the guides, as we were looking at the shrine of the book, the scroll of Isaiah, said to me, "Look at this. Can you read it?" I said, "No, I don't read Hebrew." He said, "I can. I can." He said, "This is thousands of years old and I can read what this says." And that's something that not even the ancient Egyptians can claim. In fact, he said to me, "Have you ever read a 1611 King James Bible?" He said, "You'd be hard pressed to read the English in that." He said, "But here I am, a Jew, thousands of years later, and I can read what this scroll says."
The ancient language and writing that is used within these scrolls to this very day is the primary language in Israel. This would be the equivalent of modern Egypt still utilizing ancient hieroglyphics today. Most ancient languages and the means to accurately translate and interpret them are usually lost over the course of thousands of years, and yet even today, the ancient Hebrew language is perfectly intact. This is an astounding circumstance that by all means should not be possible.
The people of Israel, the Hebrews, survived over a long period of history through various other peoples conquering them. We see the Medes, the Persians, we see the Greeks, we see the Roman Empire. All of Jewish history charts all of these various phases of secular history.
Against all odds, these records preceded and existed far beyond the rise and fall of countless empires
including the Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, ancient Egyptians, the Mayans, Aztecs, and more. Today, these records are contained in what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Torah, and the Bible. The original writings may be contiguous and preserved, but are the recorded events true? This is where the debate between fact or fiction is born. Scholars continued to debate archaeological evidence, and some questioned the ancient records' validity entirely.
And much of archaeology is more of an art than a science. The scientific part of archaeology ends once you've uncovered what's there. If you have an inscription that tells you what it is, you've got to guess what it is. And when you have two archaeologists looking at the same thing, very few come up with the same conclusion.
One of the earliest events in question dates back almost 4,000 years, during a period when pharaohs ruled the world and pyramids graced the skies. Biblical records state that the ancient Jewish bloodline, also referred to as the Israelites, migrated to Egypt in 1875 BC. Later, a new pharaoh came into power and became fearful of the growing Israelite population, enslaving them by force. Based on biblical records, it's estimated that in 1446 BC, around 3,400 years ago, the Israelites fled captivity, sparking conflict with Pharaoh and the Egyptian Empire. Some scholars argued that the lack of physical evidence was grounds to consider the entire story a myth, and debated whether or not the ancient Egyptians even knew of the Israelite people. Since many ancient empires, including the Egyptians, recorded their victories and often hid their defeats, it's not surprising that the physical evidence surrounding the biblical record would be lacking. But history can be a difficult thing to completely erase. The British archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovered an approximately 10-foot-tall black granite stone along the Nile, called the Meneptah Stela. This record was constructed 3,200 years ago to record the conflicts with the enemies of Egypt. However, what shook the very foundation of the archaeological community is that this ancient hieroglyphic record clearly mentioned Israel by name. For the first time, there was indisputable non-biblical evidence that confirms Egypt's interaction with the ancient Jews. But this discovery would prove to only be the tip of the iceberg. It's recorded that as the Israelites fled captivity, Pharaoh organized an army to pursue them. After traveling across the Sinai Desert, the Israelites finally reached the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing quickly. Despite various retellings of the story, the records state that a strong east wind blew throughout the night, and dry land appeared from one shore to the other, allowing the Israelites to safely cross. It's recorded that Pharaoh pursued them across this exposed land bridge when the waters returned and consumed the entire Egyptian army. The Red Sea has depths up to 1 mile and is 221 miles across at its widest point, making it virtually impossible to cross with a large group of people. As a result, many scholars doubted that it was possible for the event to have taken place, but this belief was about to change. During an expedition in Saudi Arabia, opposing the Egyptian border near the Red Sea, an ancient pillar was discovered that scholars conclude was constructed by the Israelites to memorialize the exodus from Egypt. Even with thousands of years of weathering, the Hebrew words Egypt, death, and Pharaoh can still be made out. But it was the pillar's location that brought the mystery of the Red Sea crossing into an entirely new light. Nearby diving expeditions of the seafloor revealed something that almost no one was prepared for. Spanning from one shore to the other was a submerged land bridge close enough to the surface of the sea that scholars theorize could have been exposed during a natural geological event or change in tide. Some divers even claim to have photographed remnants of ancient coralized chariot wheels and human bones littered across the submerged land bridge. To understand the devastating effects that scholars are only now researching, we look to the tragic Indonesia tsunami of 2004. The world witnessed how shallow, rushing water claimed the lives of nearly 230,000 people in a matter of hours. Even if Pharaoh's army moved hastily over this exposed land bridge, it would still have taken them at least an hour to travel from one side to the other. With the similarities between the events, we clearly see how Pharaoh's army, likely being miles from shore, could not have survived.
For some time, many critics have determined that that was just biblical folklore. But as time progresses, archaeology continually discovers more and more evidence that the Bible is right and the Bible is true.
Stories including those of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was said these cities existed during a time of great immorality in the ancient world and were utterly destroyed by fire and brimstone.
They have discovered pockets of land that has been seriously charred. They don't know exactly what happened with that, but in the Bible it says it rained down fire and brimstone upon that place and burned the place up. And there are areas that they have discovered charred ruins and with the smell of sulfur, burnt sulfur.
In fact, archaeologists have discovered human remains for over 1.5 million people in the area in which Sodom and Gomorrah was believed to be located. Surprisingly, the geological contents of the area confirms the biblical story of its demise. Archaeologists have discovered depths of 4 to 20 inches of sulfur and ash mixed within the surface soil and within deeper layers of earth that surround the sites. As scholars begin to consider the ramifications of these discoveries, the question remains, how could this event have happened? Parallel to these cities is a fault line where two large plates of earth are continually exerting great pressure. Combined with recently discovered underground sulfur pockets in the region, researchers are considering the possibility of how combining tectonic activity, along with highly ignitable natural deposits, could have indeed sparked the unprecedented explosion that brought an end to millions of people.
First of all, if you look at the evidences for the written record as being from a broad scale, stand back with a big wide-angle lens. When something is described in the biblical written record, you can sink a shovel into the ground somewhere and dig it up. You'll find where it was because the written record is accurate. It's geographically accurate. It's even geologically accurate. Sometimes things will be explained about rocks or rock formations, not in any scientific detail, but enough for you to know that it happened on the east side of the Jordan rather than the west side. The rocks on the east side of the Jordan, for instance, are black. They're white on the west side of the Jordan. Certain details as far as where certain things took place, suddenly an archaeologist digs something up.
And you can physically see here the destruction of the temple. You can see how the walls were knocked down by the Romans. You can see how this bridge was destroyed and made the street collapse.
Well over 100 biblical cities and sites, with tens of thousands of artifacts and tablets referring to individuals and kings, including ancient Israeli ruler King David, have been and continue to be discovered in many countries, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Israel.
An artifact that was found in the city of Dan, which is way up to the north. It used to be called Laish, which happens to have it's a plaque written in an ancient language that pronounces a curse on the house of David. But it predates the New Testament and the Hashmonean dynasty by centuries, as it goes way back towards the time of David. When they found that artifact, when the archaeologists who were beginning the restoration project on Tel Dan, the mound of the city of Dan, they accidentally ran across this thing, and when they pulled it out, they found the first written evidence of the name of David outside of the Bible itself. Up until then, of course, many people had said that it was all a legend, that David wasn't even a real person. He was a person of myth.
As far as archaeological support for Old Testament history, actually quite a bit. You have the inscription found at Tel Dan that mentions the house of David. You have also the writings of the Assyrian that mentions the house of Omri. You have the Sumerian ostraca, which ostraca they found from the time that Sumer was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. You have the Gezer calendar from Tel Gezer, which tells you about each 2 months is a new thing growing, and so on. So you have a lot of Old Testament history verified by archaeological evidence.
It seems there is no end to the evidence. Remnants for countless biblical events, including the burning peak of Mount Sinai, have been discovered and photographed by archaeologists, and to this very day contains charred earth and stones. The location that was recorded to provide the Israelites with water as the leader Moses struck a rock in the desert is also believed to have been discovered. The archaeological site is surrounded by a bed of smooth rocks not indigenous to the area, concluding that a massive water flow from an underground river was present, emerging onto the surface through a large nearby split boulder. Artifacts that confirm the location of cities, kings, wars, global disasters, and events perfectly matching ancient biblical records are being uncovered with each passing year.
As far as actual historical archaeological evidence, scientifically verified evidence, nothing's been found that would discredit the Bible in any single way. Not a single thing.
Everything points to the conclusion that the events described within the biblical record are equally as accurate and reliable as the processes utilized to preserve the record itself by the ancient Jews thousands of years ago. With tens of thousands of discoveries, why then do educational institutions and scholars continue to dispute the validity of the Bible? The answer may be the result of yet another aspect woven throughout all the writings: the belief that God exists and directly influences events within the world. The escape from Egypt, the Red Sea crossing, the burning peak of Mount Sinai, and countless other events that took place are recorded as occurring not strictly from chance or geological changes, but rather through the direct intervention from God in association with preceding prophecies for these events throughout history.
It seems that in light of the overwhelming evidence of the Bible being true, being an accurate historical record of things that have taken place, it poses the question as to why do secular archaeologists so still continue to fight against the fact that the Bible is accurate. The only answer that I can come up with that is that the Bible is a record of the Jewish people, but it is also the Word of God. And to take God out of the picture, you remove the miraculous. To take God out of the picture, you remove the all-knowing aspect of a God who knows everything. And if you do that and you don't believe in that God, well then obviously you can't believe in anything that is beyond your own imagination, beyond your own reasoning capacity. But the fact that God is in the picture in the Bible is the greatest archaeological evidence of all, because the miraculous things that were taking place, the things that he's done, the accuracy of the scriptures, all testify to something that could not be done by man. In fact, the timeline of the scriptures being written over so many different authors over such a long period of time and all knit and woven together is a testimony not of just the Jewish historical record, but of the God they believed in.
The existence of God and prophecy. That's what this conflict is really about. The fundamental reason why some scholars and educational institutes are adamantly resistant to discussing biblical history and archaeological findings in a literal and supportive manner.
The attitude when I was sitting in the archaeology classes at university, if it's in the Bible, it can't be true. But that's where they're coming from. And so you got a lot of these attacks, but you got to realize where they're coming from. and they don't have the actual evidence, scientific evidence, archaeological scientific evidence that disproves anything in the Bible. What they have is certain theories that they want to prove. But you have to remember they're coming from a certain preconception, and they work with that preconception.
After all, if there was some truth to the existence of God and the ability to foresee the future through prophecy, then prophetic events regarding our own frightening future yet to occur could be true as well, a belief that many rationalists reject.
There are several different schools of thought concerning the information that's brought forward, the archaeological evidence that's found, whether it's New Testament or Old Testament. Schools of thought that are along Christian lines or even Judaic lines. Other schools of thought that are along rationalist lines, the documentary hypothesis or higher criticism that dismisses the miraculous as being anything that's rational, therefore the miraculous can't exist because it opposes rationality. God speaking to people also is not rational, so that will be dismissed in that particular camp. Based on that, the belief that miracles do not happen, that God does not speak to people, when they dig up an archaeological artifact that appears to be biblical, they will look at it through an entirely different lens. But if you ask someone, and there are many people to ask, many very good people, but if you ask them, why? Why would you do that? And they would simply say, because it's not rational. But is there another explanation? No, the argument ends right there.
Why then haven't some scholars simply ignored the aspect of God and prophecy within the records, as what many often do with other ancient findings from the Egyptians, Mayans, and so on? Why not focus strictly on the archaeological evidence?
Not the holy books may have, most of them don't have prophecy. Some of them may have. But you can pull those prophecies out, it doesn't destroy the book. You take the prophecy out of the Bible is destroyed. You cannot remove the prophecies from the Bible and maintain the Bible. Same thing with miracles. There may be miracles in other books, holy books. You can take those miracles out and the book is fine because they're not germane. You take the miracles out of the Bible is destroyed. They cannot survive if those stories are not true.
So, could the prophecies be true? It's undeniable that many prophetic records were sometimes written hundreds of years before a specific event. In these cases, even for skeptical scholars, it's difficult to deny that many of the prophetic fulfillments took place. But it's often argued that the fulfillments were the result of chance and not of God. Is it true? Could the fulfillment of biblical prophecy be the result of chance, as some claim? Or is there a truth presented within the ancient scriptures that could change our perception of reality forever? To understand the nature of prophecy, we must look to the land of Israel during a time that many might say is a period of prophetic writings and fulfillments unlike any other period in human history, during the time when Jesus Christ walked the earth. Around the year 30 AD, Israel, after fleeing Egypt, had now been long established as a prosperous and growing nation for over 1400 years. It was at this time that Jesus of Nazareth was in the land. He provided messages of hope and life, but he also provided many detailed prophecies regarding the future of not only the Jews and Israel, but of the entire world.
The reaction to Jesus' prophecies was interesting. They didn't know what to make of them. They were confounded by them, in fact. And as usual, the disciples, not really understanding where Jesus was heading with much of his terminology, even though it was very understandable, he spoke on a level that peasants could understand.
One prophecy in particular was directed to the nation of Israel. As Jesus was in Jerusalem, he prophesied that the holy temple in the city, the most revered structure in the entire nation, would be utterly destroyed, and that no two stones would lay upon another. Not unlike expected reactions today, many people were believed to be greatly angered by this warning.
Some of the people that would not have believed the prophecy, in fact were greatly angered by it, would have been members of the Sanhedrin, namely the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. Their anger is very, very evident about such things. Look at this huge temple complex, 35 acres. The temple itself being 160 feet tall. The whole outside of the complex itself, as Josephus described it, looking like a mountain of snow, colonnaded on all sides by 60-foot high columns, built like a massive fortress. And they look at this and they say, well, what do you mean not one of these stones is going to end up upon another? They were incredulous.
In fact, along with the destruction of the Jews' holy temple, Jesus foretold that the nation of Israel would fall and the people would be scattered to the ends of the earth.
Which indicates in that prophecy that Israel will have been so utterly obliterated in history at some point in their future history that it would seem like they could never possibly live again.
37 years later, the prophecy was fulfilled in the greatest of detail.
Pompey came into this area, the Roman general, and saw the significance of where we are right now. That land bridge between two mighty empires, Mesopotamia and Egypt, the crossroads of civilization. It was a trade route that connected three continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And later on, that trade route was well known to be one of the most important trade routes in the world, the Via Maris. People then knew that if you controlled this trade route, you controlled commerce. And if you controlled commerce, you controlled money. And if you had money, you had power. In the year 68, during the holidays, actually Passover, many of the Jewish believers from around the world who came to pray and pay homage and come to visit the temple were actually stuck inside the walls when the Romans began to besiege it. The Romans built a siege wall around the city so no one will escape. The fighting in Jerusalem lasted for 2 years. In August of the year 70, the Romans managed to breach the walls. They destroyed the temple, burning it down to its foundation. Over 1 million people died trying to defend the city of Jerusalem.
And if you go to the Temple Mount now, you can look down from the original Temple Mount where those stones that Jesus predicted would be thrown down are all laying down on the original pavement, the original layer, the street where Jesus actually walked.
Every detail of the prophecy came to pass just as Jesus foretold. Additional prophetic details found in the ancient book of Ezekiel, recorded long before the fall of Israel in 70 AD, describes Israel as becoming so utterly destroyed, the future state of the nation is described as a valley of dry bones, a nation that will be dead to the world. But the prophecy continues. Israel would be later brought back to life, and the surviving Jews within the world would be regathered into their land. Seemingly optimistic scripture that was recorded even before the fall of Israel took place, and yet rationalism would suggest that this ancient prophecy could never be fulfilled.
Nowhere else in history were a people who were scattered, disassembled, removed from their nation, assimilated into multitudes of other nations on the face of the earth, were ever gathered back together once again in their original land and established as a recognized nation in the world.
But after 1,800 years, the impossible happened. On May 14, 1948, after the Holocaust and the end of World War II, the nation of Israel was reborn, and the Jewish people once again had a land to call home. The action was ordered by the United Nations. It was the first and only time the UN had created a state by way of a General Assembly vote.
Israel coming back as a nation, to me, is the most astonishing event in history. And there's a lot of astonishing events in history, but it's never happened before. It's never happened in the history of civilization that a nation could be completely dispersed, and 1,800 years later, come back together as a nation with its original national identity. This has never happened in the history of the world.
Through rational deduction, Israel should not be standing today. For a good part of the last 60 years, this tiny nation has been outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. And though conflicts with neighboring nations and Islamic extremists continue to this day, prophecy seems, at least for now, to have been fulfilled. The destruction and rebirth of Israel, survival against all odds, no doubt amazing events that some would say are stranger than fiction. But did it all happen by chance?
You only have 1 or 2 or 3 prophecies, you might be fulfilled by chance. That's a possibility. When you have, just in the first coming prophecies alone, about 50 specific prophecies, and so these prophecies are like 15 verses long, like Isaiah 52, 53. Even to fulfill every detail of that chapter purely by chance or by coincidence, to me is an impossibility.
The prophecies that were fulfilled in the Old Testament over time and history, if we were to assign that to chance, it would make fools of us all. Because the statistical probability is something that is used in everyday life. But when you talk about a statistical probability perhaps of a city that is declared a wicked city and therefore judgment is going to fall on that city, and now here's how it's going to fall, that it's going to be attacked by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, that it's going to be utterly wiped out and yet survive being wiped out. It's going to be attacked again by many nations and it will be ultimately completely destroyed, and on the site fishermen will spread their nets. Well, that's much more specific than saying the city's going to be wiped out someday. And then you find out that this prophecy is given when Babylon was just a little hick town as part of the Assyrian Empire in the south. And suddenly it grows up and a guy named Nebuchadnezzar comes along and he does attack the city. And he does wipe it out, but the people relocate to an island off the coast. And then suddenly Nebuchadnezzar, who doesn't have a navy, after 6 years of siege, backs off. Along comes Alexander over 100 years later, and he tells them to surrender. But he doesn't get any cooperation because the people are on an island. So he takes the debris, scrapes the whole site clean and throws it into the ocean, creates a causeway a half a mile out to the island, and then gets on a whole fleet of little fishing boats, sends his soldiers across and kills every last man, woman, and child on the island. Now, that's very, very specific. And considering that the prophecy in the documents that we have in the Bible says that this is the way it would happen, and then history plays it out, not all at once, but over a series of hundreds of years. How do you explain that? How do you put numbers to that and say, this was a coincidence? There are other prophecies in the Old Testament, for instance, in the book of Daniel, where we can't call them coincidence. In Daniel, one chapter alone has over 130 specific prophecies about nations and people, about invasions and wars, specific characters and intrigue. 130 prophecies that Daniel mentioned came to pass exactly. We can look at it throughout history, that during that time in that region we can name names. Phenomenal amount of detail. But again, the rational mind doesn't want to accept that. But Daniel did write it. He was quoted many times between the time that he wrote it and the time when all of those prophecies were fulfilled, and quoted by other nations that surrounded Israel, not Israel itself, which is very convenient to have other people quoting his works. And then at the end of it all came to pass.
Much of biblical prophecy is presented in a chronological fashion and builds one prophetic event upon another, often presenting a string of future events before the first event even occurs. We see this same pattern with the writing that pertains to the fall, rebirth, and modern conflicts of Israel. If only one prophetic piece of the puzzle doesn't come to pass, then the entire series of events would fall apart.
Well, looking at all of the things that we've spoken about regarding the Jewish literature and the events that have been prophesied and fulfilled, it boggles my mind to think that these things happened by chance or by coincidence. The fact that God would thousands of years ago pick a people, that these people would be scattered throughout the entire world for a couple of thousand years, and that these people would be back in a nation, that in and of itself is a phenomenal event. And the odds of that taking place are beyond reason.
Today, it would be hard to imagine what our world might be like economically, politically, and religiously in only a few decades. And yet ancient prophecy has foretold detailed events extended thousands of years into the future with unprecedented accuracy. Regardless, some scholars continue to argue that these events are not prophecies inspired by God, but are rather the fulfillment of astronomical odds.
Astronomical odds. The odds would be absolutely astronomical. When you look at the way these prophecies of the Bible come together, one on top of the other, you have only two alternatives. It's either to embrace the fact that they claim they are from God and it must be true, or that I can't believe that and I have to believe in absolutely improbable odds.
Approximately 2,500 prophecies exist within the ancient scriptures, each chronologically built upon the previous. It is estimated that 2/3 of the scriptures have now come to pass. If the fulfillment of these foreseen changes and events were provided by a higher source, then it would suggest that the remaining 1/3 of the prophecies will also come to pass. The remaining records take place during a period called the Last Days, a time foretold by Jesus Christ and recorded by over a dozen authors within the ancient scriptures. It's a time that dictates monumental change, involving every nation throughout the world. These final prophecies provide hundreds of details and specific events foretelling of an unprecedented union of world relations, beliefs, and economic systems that will give rise to a new authority with influence over all global affairs. But as soon as the world achieves this new union and declares peace and safety, mankind will be on the brink of war, an unprecedented destruction that is foretold to end 2/3 of the global population. But if this terrifying string of future events is to come to pass, when does it begin? Or has it already? According to the ancient prophetic timeline, it was foretold that the rebirth of Israel, witnessed by the world only 6 decades ago, would mark the beginning of the end, and all remaining prophecy would come to pass within a generation. As a result, hundreds of millions of people around the world believe our generation will now witness the conclusion of prophecy. Could they be right? Has the groundwork for a globally united world described within the scriptures already begun?
The Bible clearly teaches there'll someday be a global unity, eventually a one world government, a one world empire, a one world economy, a one world religion. All of these would be unified into one world system. If these prophecies are true, there'll be radical changes, much more radical than the world has ever experienced before.
You have the predictions that the world will move towards a globalized government. It doesn't mean that the world will be one specific kingdom, but one homogeneous kingdom, a kingdom made up of all kinds of nations that cooperate together.
As the scriptures portray, the last days will not bring in a new single global nation as many imagine, but rather a new homogeneous world with superseding global authorities and laws, an unprecedented ideology that has already begun.
The world certainly seems to be headed towards globalization. The various different countries and groups and personalities seem to be working to come together in some way, shape, or form. We have whole sections of the earth that are now being united. We've seen what has happened in the European Union, the joining of the nations over there into one group. They do have someone who exercises authority. They have a court system that crosses over into the various countries and overrules and has superior authority over the various countries, something I never thought I'd ever see in my lifetime.
27 of some of the world's most influential countries, including Germany, France, and Spain, are now part of what the world recognizes as the European Union. Rather than being defined as a new single nation, these governments rather act as one and have maintained their borders, individual identities, and languages. What makes this union such an unprecedented change in political relations was the birth of a new authority, court system, and shared financial system that supersedes each individual nation. A concept that only a generation ago was unimaginable. But why is this trend in globalization occurring? Prophecy foretells that this new world will not be one enforced upon the people, but rather it would be demanded by them. Prophecies foretell that the world will believe this is the solution to establish peace and harmony.
We see these things beginning to take place. And the book of Revelation in chapter 13 lays out that these things would take place in the end times. So what we're seeing is the preparation for these things. Politically, the world is starting to agree we need to become one. We need to be united. It'll solve all of our problems.
However, according to the scriptures, this globalization will not solve the world's problems. The early stages of globalization has been creating a world in which nations and cultures can no longer ignore one another, and that in itself has helped to create an environment of increased conflict between fundamental ideologies and belief systems. Prophecy clearly states that during this early period of globalization, there will be widespread wars and rumors of war, and that peace will be removed from the earth. Much of what this prophecy foretells can be seen within the radical conflicts that have evolved into global terrorism and the constant threat of attack. It is a modern issue that now affects nearly every region on earth.
In order for there to have, or there to be political unity on the face of the earth, one of the things that divides from a world's perspective is the fact that there are so many religions on the face of the earth. Even within Christianity, we see multiple divisions from different types of Christianity. If there was going to be one political system, that system must find some way of uniting those various religions. There has to be an attitude of acceptance and tolerance and finding common ground in all of the religions that everybody could basically ascribe to, and then they could form that one world religion and they would be able to promote the unity politically that they want. The terrorism that we see that is based in religious ideology today would prevent any type of political unity in the world. Something has to take place where the ideologies have to come into one frame of mind. If we look at the terrorism that is in the world today, it is fracturing the world. It is threatening various bases of political authority. And until that is dealt with, you will never have political unity, because the ideologies religiously of the people take precedent over their political aspects and their persuasions. So from the world's perspective, the solution to terrorism is to unite the religions. If they could unite the religions on common ground, then the terrorists are eliminated.
Today, a majority of the world's leaders seem to agree, in order to have true political peace, we must unite the world's cultures and in effect find commonality among the world's fundamental belief systems.
We see today many, even within the church, those who profess to be Christians, we see many different kinds of denominations now wanting to be together with other kinds of religions in the world. We see the Catholic Church trying to unite many different kinds of religions and having a common prayer service together. And so we see many of the religions of the world trying to get along. We call it the ecumenical community. And that's just part of what the Bible says that will be coming in the last days.
Just as prophecy foretells, during the last days, we see this rapidly progressing into a commonality that is being accepted across the globe. It is an unprecedented belief that many paths can lead to God through the elimination of an absolute truth.
On a global scale, there's a new way of thinking about religion. It's a relativistic way, if I could use a kind of an intimidating word, of looking at people's belief system. It's also the most foolish thing that you could ever imagine if you really sit and think about it. It's based on the premise that what you believe is fine, as long as you're sincere about it and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. And people raise up their own belief systems within themselves, and they say, well, this is what I want to believe, and you believe what you want to believe, and I'll believe what I want to believe, which means that nobody's belief is right. It's all our own making. We are our own little gods, making our own little religions.
It's not hard to see the move to consolidate religions, even within the Christian religion. There are many factions of Christianity that have become extremely tolerant of other views, to embrace other thoughts, other religions, to bring in Eastern ideas and even some occult ideas into the church, and that there are many, many ways to get to God. The notion that it all comes down to personal choice is really opening the door for acceptance of basically anything or any type of religious thought at all. By accepting them all, they embrace none, and so consequently there will be a uniting in the sense that no one is against anyone, or no one is truth. There is no absolute.
But if the result is peace, and that everyone appears content, then what's the problem?
If everybody's happy with this one world religion, what could possibly be wrong with it? It's not based on truth. First of all, it's not true. If every man believes what he wants to believe, he cannot call it truth, because when he dies, his truth dies with him. That means it was never true in the first place. He was his own God of his own false religion.
Regardless of one's belief system, it can hardly be argued that the modern consolidation of beliefs is occurring on an unprecedented scale. And yet, all of this is simply another piece to the prophetic timeline that is rapidly leading to the emergence of a new world. The move towards global unity is vastly believed by the world to bring about a new age of peace and security, the cornerstones for protecting our modern way of life. But what is the real purpose to it all? Is it really to bring about global equality or establish peace? Or does it really come down to what's most important to the people of this world? Money. When it comes down to it, everything is controlled and revolves around the world's financial systems. Food, medical care, transportation, shelter, technological advancement and entertainment. A collapse in these systems would result in the loss of the quality of life so many have become accustomed to. But the foundation and the financial structures of the world have been cracking for quite some time, and nations are beginning to take notice. The final piece, laying the groundwork for the prophetic globalization puzzle, is financial unification. Just as the world has been unionizing politically and religiously, it is inevitable that the world will eventually be unified through a single world currency.
Where it would be much easier to come in, and if there's a collapse happening in a confederacy of nations, then someone can come in and say, hey, we can help you out.
Given the circumstances of the world today, this may be the only solution to prevent events such as the U.S. housing crash of October 2008 that quickly affected nearly every industry on Earth, triggering a global recession and damaging some of the world's most dominant currencies. We have begun to realize just how intertwined and fragile our global financial systems truly are. As long as we live under the current economic structure, the world lives under the threat of future global economic depression or even collapse.
The move towards global financial control is already happening in various areas. In the European Union, as they've established a one currency between the nations, I've seen this in my lifetime. I was over in Germany in the military, for 18 months, and there was the mark. In France, there was the franc. Various countries, they had their individual currencies. Now that has happened there. If you would have told me that 40 years ago, I'd have said, you're crazy. It's never going to take place. But we have seen regional globalization of finances. What currency we will end up with, I truly do not know. But it may be the euro. It may be something from some other worldwide source. It might be a new currency that no one's ever heard about that will indeed be the worldwide currency.
Don't think it could ever happen. It's already begun. At a recent G8 summit in Italy, the leaders of the world discussed their growing concern over global financial security and openly discussed drastic new ideas to create financial stability. It was during this summit that the idea of a global currency was officially born. This is the first minted prototype that was presented to and discussed by the leaders of the world at the G8 summit, including Barack Obama of the United States and the President of the European Union. For the first time in history, the world's most influential nations have come together to recognize, discuss, and embrace the possibility of establishing a single worldwide currency to secure and control global financial markets. In fact, this coin was also presented to the Pope of the Catholic Church by representatives of the Royal Canadian Mint, seemingly foreshadowing the future foretold by prophecy and the unification between politics, religion, and finance. The world is rapidly becoming more accepting of this new global ideology like never before. In theory, global financial control should result in global financial security.
So the illusion is that global financial control will give global financial stability. But I don't believe that is the case, because once that takes place, you have a central control, and you will be able to, that central control will be able to manipulate the finances of the entire world. And I don't believe that there's anybody on the face of the earth who can do that with a pure heart, with good intentions, and without greed factoring in, because those things have been part of mankind for a very, very long time.
This is not to say that the currency presented at the G8 summit will by any means become the new worldwide currency. However, the event presents an unprecedented shift in global thinking among world leaders and financial institutions. The remaining prophecies within the scriptures are specific in regards to the state of the world in the last days. Prophecy doesn't simply foretell of political, religious, and financial changes over time, but that it would be the simultaneous convergence of all scenarios that would clearly mark the beginning of the end. The convergence of the events prophesied would create a global scenario that has never existed before.
When you consider that thousands of years ago, the condition, the state that the world would be in, that we can see today, the globalization of nations, the push towards a one religion, the need, it seems now, for a single economy through the world. All of these things were prophesied in the scriptures. And the odds of those things taking place over time, over multiple nations, over many different historical events, I don't even think can be calculated.
According to the prophetic timeline, man indeed believes that globalization is the solution to our problems. With the political, religious, and financial fronts united in the future, the world no longer segregated by culture or borders will be primed to embrace the rise of a new world authority. It's written that the newly found unions of the world will not only welcome this new authority, they will demand it.
There will be a one world leader. It doesn't necessarily mean king of the world, but somebody who comes along who is able to capture the world's attention and hold it. A person who is so charismatic that people will say, We don't care what his agenda is. We just like him. We will follow him. He will make proposals and make political alliances that today we think are impossible.
At first, he's coming because the people in the world want him to come. They want things to change. They want a better economy.
Throughout the scriptures, this man is referred to by more than 20 names, but there's one name in particular that you may recognize him by the most.
And that one person the Bible speaks about is called the Antichrist.
But when we say Antichrist, of course, Hollywood has really latched onto this. They love to depict him in movies like The Omen or End of Days or something like that. And yet, as you read about this person in the Bible, is someone who will be so charismatic that he will captivate the world. They will call him the greatest leader that has ever lived.
I think believers who understand Bible prophecy might recognize him as he's rising to power, but the unbelieving world probably won't. They'll probably see him as a savior.
Though there will be peace, it will be only for a short time. But according to prophecy, when the world finally announces peace and safety, sudden destruction will be upon us. It's foretold that Israel will then reject the global union. The New World Authority, influenced by the Antichrist, will quickly turn hostile towards Israel.
Israel during this time will be standing in the face and against everything that this Antichrist wants to do. At some time, the world is going to come against Israel. This is prophesied in the Word of God. We see that in Ezekiel, and we see that in the book of Revelation. They're going to come against Israel and try to completely destroy it.
Just as the fall of Israel was prophesied in 70 AD, history will repeat itself in the last days, and Israel will be at war with the world.
One of the things that we look at is Ezekiel 38. And the prophet Ezekiel wrote thousands of years ago, okay? Ezekiel 38 tells of the nations that are going to come against Israel in the last days. So all those first four names that are listed in Ezekiel 38 is all in the area of is Russia. And then it says after that they're going to come with Persia, and we know that that's Iran. I think it was in the 30s that Persia's name was changed to Iran. Their government has been switched to a radical Islamic terrorist government who is calling for the destruction of Israel. And then Libya. We haven't heard from Libya for 25 years. He's been silent until just recently, over the last year, they signed a billions of dollars arms agreement with Russia.
Once again, this will be a war for Israel's very existence. But this is a war they cannot win.
The forces of the north will come down along with other forces in the region, and they will come against Israel. And there is no way Israel will be able to defend itself against these forces.
The forces that come against Israel will be the greatest accumulated force the world will have ever seen. Israel once again will face extinction.
That major battle that'll happen in the valley of Armageddon to the north, where the armies of the north will be coming down, sweeping down over the hills of Judea and into the area of Samaria. The remnants of the Jews will escape. They'll go to a city of haven. Many people believe it to be Petra.
Bible seems to indicate they run off to a place called Selah, which has another name in the Bible, in history actually, called Petra, which is really quite possibly the world's most defensible land position.
Many scholars believe that Petra could have been constructed by an ancient king of Israel for the purpose of protecting the nation during the last days. It has sat dormant for thousands of years, waiting to fulfill its prophetic role. During this period of war and chaos, Jesus Christ also foretells of natural catastrophic events that will reach every corner of the earth.
In the book of Revelation, it speaks about this time of tribulation. And it describes in more detail what Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24. It would be a time of devastation, of tribulation, like the world has never seen before. It speaks about earthquakes and famines and wars. It speaks about huge numbers of the population of the earth being wiped out by these things. A third, a fourth, over and over again, the population of the earth is whittled down during this time. And what's interesting is over the course of the disastrous things that take place, the people of that time do not turn their hearts back to God.
Throughout this short period of tribulation, there will be global war, financial collapse, disease, earthquakes, floods, and earth changes unlike anything ever witnessed before. Every nation upon the earth will suffer, and billions will die. But if the events occurring today are setting the stage for this inevitable future, then why do so many reject what so many others see clearly?
Now, having examined what the scriptures say about events past, prophetically, and that which is happening currently to align with the things that the Word of God says, the question has to come to mind, why doesn't everyone see this? Why are so many going along as if there was no information available about this at all? Well, it has to come down to the fact that if you do not believe in a God who is able to foretell what is to come, if you don't believe in a God who has shown himself to be faithful in the scriptures to so many things, if you don't believe the scientific statistical information that displays that these things are genuine, they are true, the odds of them happening by chance are too great, then you should be able to embrace what it says. You should be able to have a view of the world according to what the scriptures say. But the scriptures say something else. It says during the last days, there would be a great deception that is released upon the world. There would be a blindness to many. And the eyes of the people of the world will not be able to see the things, even though they're right in front of their faces, literally. So what this comes down to is that in order to see and understand what the Bible says, requires a person to believe in the one who gave us the Bible. If you reject him, there is a blindness to that. You're looking for all kinds of other things, other ways, other ideas.
But if our world is watched over by the God from the ancient scriptures, why would he allow the world to suffer, to be destroyed? The events prophesied are not derived from God's hatred of the world, for it is written that God loves the people of the world, but is rather the inevitable outcome created through the actions of our own heart's desire and free will. The prophecies of the scriptures must come to pass, as man's heart has not and will not change.
The prophecies of the Bible, to me, make the Bible the Bible. So much of the Bible is prophetic, and so much of those prophecies are regarding the future. So many of them were made so long ago and have come to pass in the finest detail. But if the prophecies of the past came true, I can't imagine that the prophecies of our future that are made in the Bible won't come true. They must, and they must in the finest detail.
If the prophecies of the Bible are not from a divine source, then the remaining events foretold in the scriptures will never come to pass, and our world will progress to one of an infinite number of unpredictable futures. But if the world remains on the path to prophetic fulfillment, it means that the source of the scriptures are indeed divine, and Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be. Then his promise woven throughout the ancient scriptures is true, the promise of eternal life for those that follow him.
So having discussed all of these various prophecies and the veracity of the Word of God and the statistics and the things that are to come, It still comes down to a choice that each and every person is going to have to make. Now, in order to make that choice, you can believe what you hear, or you can seek for yourself. If you really want to know what is true, you can seek it and the Lord will reveal it to you.
Your time within this world is passing away, and every day you are making a choice to seek the truth or reject it, a choice to pursue eternal life, or the choice to pass away with the world you love so much.